not going to necessarily go anywhere. But we are now live. Um, well, the thing that you were saying about people's past experiences and that informing the way they even take in reality is a lot like you've heard a lot of Peterson lectures. Reminds me of Piaget.
Oh yes.
And you know who's actually really big into Piaget is Scott Skelton.
Oh, perfect. I'll definitely have to reach out to him. I don't know if you saw, I posted in the Tricking group earlier today, just looking for some people who are in the fields of psychology, philosophy, or neuroscience. Because I think that these ideas need to start being studied in a formal structure. I think that a lot of it can all be put together and pieced together with some of the new technologies that we have at our disposal right now, and I'm super keen for that. But anyways, back to Piaget and Peterson. What were you saying?
Well, just the idea that there's he called himself a genetic epistemologist, and it's a much more dynamic rendering of sort of the almost I wanted to say irreducible, but it's not even necessarily analyzable. Just sort of the idea that there's a phylogenetic and ontogenetic ground which was always already there, that you can't sort of rewind and take apart and have some sort of
right, like the essential rules of the game, right? Is it sort of what you're getting at?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
things that we don't have the ability to just change at will. Like the way that we interact with other people, and that game of interacting with those people. Is that what you're getting into?
Well, I guess the reason I look at it, or was trying to bring it out in a certain way, is because I mean, I really have not read very much Piaget at all.
I haven't read any of his like formal work. I've just like heard him described by others.
Yeah, and apparently that's a problem, because he's really hard to reduce. Apparently, all of his books are very specialized and go in certain directions, and it's very hard for people to weave it all together. I've certainly seen people try to do it on the bookshelves, but I picked up something on the East Coast when I was visiting. It's called Piaget for Teachers. I think it's right here on my desk. But anyway, the reason I found that fascinating is just when you look at people who are trying to like Immanuel Kant.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to do his Critique of Pure Reason, and he's pretty hard to unpack. But it's like, how do you get past this problem where people kept trying to find, okay, what are the a priori that we start from as far as getting certainty about what are the bounds and limits of reason, what we can know and guarantee about it. And I thought that Piaget's was sort of a complete intermeshing of experience and these transcendentals, ordered thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as we were talking about Anthony Peake, and by the way, if anyone is listening to this and it just sounded like it sort of started, that's because it just did. We started talking about Anthony Peake. I'll try to put some links there if you guys are, if this does get published. But Anthony Peake, in the beginning of that podcast, he talks about, he's not interested in beliefs. He's interested in the truth and
right.
sort of bringing forth the mysteries rather than trying to nail something down or find some sort of confirmation. And
Right.
he's really had a hard time elbowing himself in. I mean, you can't find a podcast where he's not whining about it, because it's always,
Oh yeah, no.
like, oh, this guy got credit, whatever.
Oh yeah, and he talked about it in that podcast as well.
Yeah.
He's like, these other people, they're getting pedestaled as, these great thinkers when they're only, and he was like, I'm not saying that they're stealing my ideas. They've come to it of their own accord. It's just they're only touching a portion of what I'm trying to unearth. But because he's a non-academic, as he self-proclaimed,
Yeah.
It limits him, which is also sort of where I view myself in this field. I definitely am fascinated at the level of an academic, but I have no interest in the formal training that's associated with it. However, I am interested in associating with the people who have gone through that and can maybe shed some light on where I fall short in my ideas. But
right.
It's all coming together quite interestingly, I will have to say, especially to notice how everything echoes other things, just using different forms of the language. And it seems that language is one of the almost hindrances to the deeper level of existence, which is why it's quite interesting that, like, tricking, there's an unspoken language that's there that happens when we aren't trying to name the tricks, in the session, at the session, in that moment, when you don't have to, people always talk about this idea that, like, there's an unspoken understanding at the session of who's going next. You don't have to look and point and, like, acknowledge and all of these, informal pleasantries that people do. It's just this very raw, ethereal moment where everyone is just truly in the act of being there. And, like, to a degree, they get pulled out with their own, goals and ideas about what they're trying to get. But that goes away in that moment when they go to start doing the trick, if they actually are doing it properly. Wouldn't you agree?
That's a really interesting thought, and it definitely ties into a lot of the stuff that Krishnamurti was talking about. And I definitely, we got a lot of this in our last conversation too. So what you're talking about is immersion. Someone's completely immersed, and we can go into flow state too.
Yeah, I would more colloquially call it like group flow is, a more 21st century way of describing it for people.
So yeah, group flow.
It's a way to describe it for 21st century people. I wouldn't say it's
flow
accurate.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting to me is just sort of how, depending on the level of analysis, we look upon that experience either with, sort of a feeling that, yeah, this is sort of what life's about, or, well, he basically just has been locked into a particular focal practice, and for the time being he'll be doing whatever he's doing. It's just that oh shit, he may never question the context again. He may never leave that context, because I mean, if you want to look at the example everyone would probably relate with would be National Socialism, group flow, real group flow in there.
I wouldn't say that that's necessarily group flow, though. That is group think. That is an ideology coming forth and people subscribing to that. It's like how Krishnamurti goes into, you know, he talks about all of these ideas, but then like almost vehemently not denies, but disavows religion and
Yeah.
you know, some of the language associated with religion. Like he didn't even want to give the edification to the idea of prayer, you know, because he was basically saying inherently within the word prayer, it requires some form of a call and a question to be asked. And the second that that question is asked, you can no longer truly listen to what is actually there. And so what's fascinating about how it comes back to tricking and to like this idea of group flow is in group flow, you know, there are multiple people entering the flow state, and in the flow state, there are certain neurological happenings, you know, and so one of the things that happens is transient hypofrontality, which is where the portion of the mind, the prefrontal cortex, starts to shut down, and basically you get a supercharge to other portions of your brain. And Anthony Peake actually sort of touched on this to a degree when he was talking about how the neurons firing are not actually the thought happening. It's sort of a response. It's a I don't know what the word is, a causality of. It's something that happens, a symptom of. That's the word.
Yeah, sure.
It's a symptom of the thought. The thought is, because the thought is intangible. Well, this idea of group flow is very similar to that, where as you enter in the flow, there are patterns that are happening within the brain, but those patterns aren't necessarily the actual act of flow. And where it gets really interesting is Ian McGilchrist actually talks about this idea of fluid dynamics and of flow in not the idea of the state, but in the scientific, you know, materialist sense. And he talks about the fluid mechanics equation and how it's so complex that, you know, these high-level math people have barely even begun to crack an understanding of it. And he showed this image, and I can't find it for the life of me, and I really need to. It's in one of his talks, but it's this image of water. It looks like water, at least, and it's got a central flow through the center of it, and there's all of these small whirlpools, you know, coming off each side. And he talks about the whirlpools as being a result of turbulence. And while those whirlpools, they spin off, they create their own entity, which is that whirlpool that has its own fluid dynamics to it. But it's still part of that whole movement of fluid from beginning to end. And it seems to me that it's something like the flow that when we truly enter flow and experience it fully, it's almost as if that is our peak point of creativity, and that is sort of the universe creating something new from the turbulence that it has in front of it, which would tie back in with Krishnamurti's idea of being present to engage the world. This idea of responsibility, not as a way of like you have to do something because of someone else, but the ability to respond adequately in the moment. Like more accurately, you know, defining that word responsibility. It seems to me that flow is the place where you are most responsible. You know, you have the most power to adequately respond to any challenge thrown at you. And when you're in that position, that is the turbulence of the universe, and the creativity that comes out of that flow state is a resultant of the problem that you encountered, right? Because flow isn't dependent on something simple. You know, that's like if the skill is too high and the challenge is too low, you get bored. If the skill is too low and the challenge is too high, you get anxiety. But if those two are equally matched with each other, then you enter into the flow state. Prior to that, you'll enter into like a mild arousal. But if they're truly matched with each other, that's when you can enter into that flow state. And I actually want to grab some of my notes, so give me just a second. Because there's these pieces of the flow state that you need. They're almost they're elements that you need to have. And it seems to me that tricking has a multitude of these things. And what's interesting about the flow state is I think I talked about this a little bit in our last conversation, but it's a path that can be remembered. You know, it's a path in the woods that if you walk it over and over again, eventually you're never going to lose that path because you've worn it in. You've ingrained it in yourself.
Right. Yes.
And
sure.
So essentially what we're trying to do is figure out how we can make the conscious mind engage in an activity that the result would be an unconscious mind that's acting, right? That's sort of what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a tough one. I think it's around dialogue 7, 8, 9. Don't remember where where Krishnamurti and Anderson are talking about trying to cultivate attention and saying that you can't do it. I think attention is the closest, at least in spirit, that he comes to when we're talking about a flow state. But it's really not a flow state, at least not for Krishnamurti.
No, it's a way of life, and I understand exactly what he's talking about. But to me, and I've been thinking about this a lot actually the last couple of days. It seems to me that it's something like Krishnamurti is living in the center flow of the universe. Like in that picture, that image that I was describing,
mm-hmm.
he's in the center flow, not in the turbulent flow. I think it's called laminar flow in fluid dynamics. I was doing a little bit of research into it because I was curious. But it seems to me something like that, because there's a way of being that is, it's not that it's non-confrontatory or without conflict, but
mm-hmm.
it's it flows, but not in the creative sense. Like it doesn't regenerate. Like maybe that's the wrong term.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't regenerate.
That's definitely the wrong term to use for that.
There's this guy, and I've sort of tried to, and you're right. I want to talk about language a little bit too, because you said it earlier. I've heard it said a lot of different ways, and it's kind of a pain in the ass to translate it into different things. And it could be useful to someone, could not be useful to another person. But I like the fluid dynamics thing. I want to hear more about that.
I'm super fascinated.
There's a guy who actually just started a podcast series 4 hours ago. I saw him when I opened up my YouTube page. His name is John David Ebert, and Heidegger does not use this term, but he does quite a bit in describing Heidegger.
John David Ebert? Is that what you said?
John. Oh shit! You made me forget his name. John.
It's cool.
John David Ebert. David Ebert.
Okay, cool.
But he talks about abstract phase space,
mm-hmm.
and what Krishnamurti is talking about is not abstract phase space. It's not reducible down to a something that you can be certain about. And what abstract phase space means is it is something which is completely graspable, where you can make judgments about it. You can have a consensus reality with someone else about it, and it is determinate. And for what Kay, that's what most people call Krishnamurti, what Kay is talking about is something entirely different, which is a complete denial of the psychological security for which the determination of some determinate abstract phase space in a relationship, in tricking, whatever it is, where you have a determinate map where the psychological security that brings is completely denied.
Right.
So you're not denying the insight. You're not trying to negate that kind of apprehension and consciousness. You're just simply realizing the futility of hanging on to any one particular one, even if it seems to direct a plethora of others. It is completely you're killing your own knowledge. You're killing your own intelligence by doing so.
Right. Okay. So there's a specific phrase that Krishnamurti used that was really pivotal for my understanding.
Okay.
And it was, to truly live in each moment, you have to die to each moment.
Yeah, and reincarnate now.
Ask that just a little bit to phrase it in a more conceivable way, which is to live in each minute, you must die to each minute. And to extrapolate from that, I would say effectively what he's saying is, to truly be able to embrace what's coming at you in the now and be a part of the now, you have to forget that there was a past. And to do that, you have to not let the ego be dictating what you're thinking about. And it seems that that's a rather difficult thing to do. And that's where flow seems to come into things as a tool, which is something that I've often described tricking as a thing that has given me tools through my life. And I think that if properly utilized, this tool can be used to tune ourselves to be more in touch with what is. Because when you're tricking, you aren't concerned with anything but what is in that moment, what is around you, what is happening, you know, the ground beneath you, the air around you, how your muscles are contracting. That is all that you're focused on and all that is, you know, and the rest of everything really falls away. And there's something that seems to be bigger than just a lapse in memory in that moment. It's not simply that the brain decides not to record that. In fact, it hyper records that, but it doesn't play it back in instant replay. You know, there isn't, it takes away the time delay. That's exactly what it is. There is no time delay when you've truly entered into that state.
Time delay. Explain what you mean when you say that. I think I understand.
So perception is the past. Everything that you think of and are perceiving, and like as your mind races and thinks through all the things that just happened or are happening right now, there's still things that have happened. It's not that it's something that's yet to come, because the brain has to go through like the photons hitting the rods and the rods processing and like all of that. And so, you know, there is some form of time delay between when the mind actually grasps what's happening. And now, granted, it's like barely measurable by our concept of time, but it's enough to disconnect.
Yes. Okay. Sure. Sure.
And so, oh fuck, there was a point that I wanted to tie that to, but you lost it. Has something to do with, oh, okay. So there was something that came to me in a conversation probably 10 or 12 years ago. It was an interesting conversation with one of my friend's dads. and he actually studied to be a priest for a long ass time, and eventually just got to the point where he was like, yeah, I'm not about it. And he just never really pursued that, but he's a fantastic person to talk to. So anyways, the specific thing that we were talking about was the idea of time in the universe and how it all is playing together. And he said something to me that I found extremely interesting. And what that was everything is happening, has happened, and is going to happen all at the same time. Time is our way of perceiving the totality in a way that our brains do not explode. And it was a very informal conversation that we got to that, but I started thinking about that recently, and I definitely think that, especially with that Anderson Peak conversation, when they got to the end talking about this idea of death and not dying because of the getting closer and closer to death, but never being able to truly get to the end of the room. And I knew what other thing he was referencing, that thought experiment about, you know, the point between him and the thing and being able to retrieve the thing.
Yeah. That's actually one of the things that turned me off of his work initially. When the guy who runs the podcast actually recommended I read Anthony Peak. And when I checked him out, I was like, oh, this guy's just...
You know him?
The guy who runs the podcast? No, I wouldn't say I know him, but he is receptive to emails from time to time.
Gotcha. So you just
I think this is actually when he was actually active on Facebook at this time. I think it was through Facebook messaging. He doesn't respond to Facebook as far as I know anymore. But that's Michael Tsarion, and he is something else. But yeah, when I was listening to Anthony Peak, I was just like, oh, this guy's just, you know, why is he so obsessed with cheating death? And I didn't read any of the shit. And yeah, he's incredible. Anthony Peak's great. I really enjoy him. As far as time goes, yeah. So what Kay is advocating is your brain must explode. That's basically what he's saying, is saying that if you never ever have that releasement from time, their intelligence won't operate. You won't have the opportunity to be completely like in this trembling, just complete, what's it called? Just being completely ravished by your attention. That won't happen. I don't know if that makes sense, but
a little bit.
He's essentially like, it's not going to be euphoria necessarily. Maybe it will be, but it really calls for you to just completely negate certainty. And that's, the brain needs security. I think he talks about this in the Anderson when he's talking about the brain needs security. And if it's finding its security in the content of consciousness,
right,
that is going to be a problem eventually. It may not be a problem within a particular level of analysis. It may not manifest as a problem, but what will happen is it will completely dull the sensitivity, because you'll privilege this one thing over everything else, or you'll not. It's not even necessarily that. You might not privilege the one thing over everything else, but you may just completely it loses all meaning. Like when someone says a prayer, you know, pray the rosary or whatever, and they're not thinking about anything really, you know, they're just doing it. Or an example.
That's precisely what turned me off to the church is they never explained what's behind it. You know, if I had someone coming at me like, you know, Jordan Peterson and explaining that when I was like, and I mean, maybe I wouldn't have been responsive because I was 15, but I feel like I was asking those questions and not getting answers. You know, I was like, okay, well, what's behind this? Like, what's the reason? Like, why does that matter? And like, and then they began crossing the line of past what was, you know, a moral ethic of how to act in the world. And it was a dictation of rules to act by. And the moment that I like can identify the moment where I left that church of thought. And it was when they told me that I should primarily become friends with people of our church and the sister church, and that we should avoid those who are not in a part of those things. And I was like, no, it's wrong. There's something that is amiss there. And and that's when I was like, yeah. And I ended up being a part of things for a few more years just to, you know, appease my mom and her wants. Like I was confirmed in the Catholic Church, but like we had to write this letter. And like, you're a 17-year-old, and in my letter, I straight up asked questions, and they said that the father was supposed to read them. I never got a response or someone reaching out to me, but my questions were along the lines of like, what gives you the belief that all of this is right, and like where, why, like why, the question of why, and they never even attempted to broach the subject. And they never even attempted to sort of distill it down in a way that is understandable to the average person. And, you know, some people, they go to church as the ritual, and it's a good thing for them. Bill Burr was talking about this in a recent podcast. He's like, you know, I'm thinking about going back to church, and, you know, not to really listen to what they have to say, but just to sit there for an hour and just sort of think about shit. And,
absolutely.
And that's something that Peterson mentions as well, is like, that's something that's fundamentally missing from the West, is that contemplation. And that's something that the church brought forth in the past. Now, that's not to say that religion is the thing that we should all be following blindly, in the slightest. But it is to say that in the past, religion did seem to have a purpose within society. And so this sort of brings us up to like the Enlightenment era, and like with where Nietzsche comes about. And actually, I'm going to pull up this quote because I want to read it in full properly.
Okay. So while you're pulling that up, I just don't want to get too derailed, because what I'm talking about, as far as, you know, saying the prayer, it doesn't necessarily have to be religion, although that's where sometimes it's the most powerful and most all-pervading. But I mean, it happens at martial arts schools. The martial arts school that I work at.
Oh, precisely.
They say a student creed, and at the instructor training, the person who's running the instructor training is like, you know what I do, guys, to prepare myself for the classes? When we do the creed, I think about the creed, and that's, you know, that's what gets me, you know, situated. But it's like, wait, isn't that, why would we say it at all? Isn't that kind of implied? But no matter how good the system is, no matter how well we're able to draw out some form of attention, it will always dull attention by the not the ritual itself, but the certainty, the psychological certainty with which we imbue those rituals.
Okay, yes. Yes. I would definitely agree with that to a point,
Hmm.
because I think that you're talking about true rituals that have a form and structure that is completely coherent across time, right?
Potential. I mean, it could be anything from, brushing your teeth to eating, or it doesn't matter. It's just that the shit gets. We no longer appreciate it. We don't realize that we're typing on a keyboard, or that we're using a cup, or that we're sitting in a chair. And these things
I
these
think,
things are.
okay, continue, sorry.
I mean, if we don't appreciate those kinds of things, we will constantly be running into every sort of different kind of novelty to escape ourselves, to escape boredom, suffering, whatever it is. And that's why, and this is a little bit antithetical, when you hear that Krishnamurti talk, people need to start thinking. I know when he talks about thought, he's talking about mechanical thought, but people have to really have, thank you for this word, autolectic
Autotelic.
experience with their own feeling. Autotelic, thank you. You need to enjoy it, or else you're going to retard yourself. You'll literally retard yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I completely agree with that. And so that's something where I actually had to listen to it. Probably I've actually listened to the first one or two talks at least 3 times by now, because it was something very difficult to grasp how they open that with knowledge and this idea of how knowledge plays into things, but you need to forget, right? And you need to just accept what is and be in that moment paying attention. And as I thought through it, he's not saying, and you touched on this earlier, it's not that you deny the insight that's available through the act, but rather you don't ascribe any overarching meaning. You don't pedestal that moment. You just simply let it pass like water through your hands and accept the next water that's coming through your hands. Right? And so it's that act of being able to let all of those things accumulate, because it's like there's a bucket of memory beneath your hands. Your hands is the thing that's perceiving, but the memory is, your content of consciousness. And it's a bucket that's going to fill up whether you're paying attention to the bucket or not.
Right, exactly.
And so if you can just truly, if you're looking at the bucket, it's almost like you spill so much of the water because you're looking at the bucket and not guiding the stream with your hands. But if you can pay attention to guiding the stream with your hands and noticing, oh, the stream is moving, I need to move, and moving with it to guide it into that bucket, that's when you have the fullest bucket in the same amount of time that everyone else's bucket is lacking.
Oh boy. All right. I don't want to unpack that one too much.
That's okay. We can just move on to
you have a quote, right?
Yeah. So this is a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. I've not read Nietzsche extensively, but I've heard this quote misquoted and misascribed many times to serve in an end of ideas, to sort of push their narrative.
Absolutely. Everyone uses him. The liberals, the conservatives, the communists.
When you really read sort of the extra bit to it, it goes, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, in its totality, that is something that is very, very different from God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him, which is what you hear.
Yeah, it is.
And
that's some Rick and Morty tier shit right there.
And people do that as a way to say, well, look, science came about, materialism came about, and we need to dispense with this idea that there's something more. And it's interesting because it probably took me, I'd say a solid, what was I, like 15 when I decided that I was not really down with the church. I really stopped using the word God until I was about 23, 24, which was only in the last year or so.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I stopped using it is because it didn't feel authentic to what I was thinking of. And that's when I started to sort of touch on, you know, people like Alan Watts and, you know, sort of just the Alan Watts seems to be a way of explaining things to the layman. You know, he has
he's great.
He has a simple elegance to him in the way that he can describe things in an everyday perspective, whereas Krishnamurti is more accurate, and thus it's harder to follow because the closer you get to it, the more it's, you know, the Tao Te Ching, and you can't make heads or tails of it. Mm-hmm. And only once you realize that there is neither heads nor tails to make, that's when you actually start to grasp things. And so it's interesting that you sort of have to fail at learning the thing that you're trying to learn. Like, what was the thing that I said to you the other day in our Facebook chat? It was let's see, it's right here. It's like a search for remembering to forget what you knew, which was the act of forgetting. An obsession with getting there when you need to learn to go.
Yeah.
Right. So that seems to be the bigger thing.
It's complete nonsense is what it is.
Yes, but that's
right.
That's
literally nonsense. And yeah, exactly. That is it. That is it.
But see, the thing is, it's no longer nonsense to me.
No, it's not. It's not. But someone
and Carl Jung actually talked about this, and I watched a face-to-face talk with him that I stumbled across on YouTube, and they ask him, really interestingly, they say, "Do you believe in God?"
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of chuckles and he goes, "I don't know how to answer that. I don't need to believe in anything. I know."
Yeah.
And he just laughs. And I was like, yeah, I fucking get it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's weird, but I get it.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
This footage or just to use it? I'm trying to figure out what's that game.
You guys are sorting out some footage?
Yeah, he was just trying to get on my computer and check some shit out.
Nice.
Nice. But yeah, so bringing, we went far.
You said that you stopped using the word when what? Yeah, I don't remember exactly what you said, but it was beautiful.
The word no longer, I was no longer aligning that word in my head with what I was thinking about. It was something separate. God was a creation of man.
Yeah. Right.
And I mean, to a degree, I would still say that, but I understand now what, like, if you want to be able to have a conversation like this, you have to be able to understand the versatility of language and which words can be interchanged without misspeaking, right? And so I just came to a point where I started to realize that, like, oh shit, people do not use the same words to describe the same thing. And this is actually, if you're willing to side tangent into tricking, I believe one of the reasons that there is a constant debate on what is called what and why it is so difficult to nail it down is because in the moment when you're doing it, going back to the beginning of our talk, there is no need for a conversation. People understand what is being said through the movement, right? And this, you know, it's like why you see rise circles at like these Aboriginal like dances, right? And like you see these movements being done. It's because these movements, they reach and pull you into somewhere else where language is not a necessity. And that's where it gets interesting, is because you're still communicating. There is an exchange of something, and there's definitely something gained in the form of knowledge, but it's not linguistically tied, you know? And like,
Yeah.
Terence McKenna talks about the cumbersome use of language to a degree. He also talks about how like language sort of called into being, you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of the stoned ape theory.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So with the stoned ape theory, it seems to be something like, because these apes had access to these psilocybin mushrooms that had a particular neurological effect on the way that the brain of the, you know, the monkey, the ape, connected with itself. It gave birth to this way of trying to explain something and put words to it, to it's almost like the observer was created in some sense in that portion of evolution, if you ascribe to that. And so as language developed, it seems to be taking us further and further from what we originally were. And it's almost like what Anderson Peake was talking about, where he's like, you know, what if the most efficient organism is the amoeba? You know, like what if that's all that there needed to be? But Alan Watts also talks about this idea of the universe being a play that it's putting on for itself. And this idea that we're all actors coming about playing our part and entertaining ourselves, you know, through this act of being. And it's, you know, it ties into his idea of the video game. You know, they're just putting slightly different artistic spins on the description. But fundamentally, it seems to be the same idea of there's a game here to be played. And if you want to stop playing the game and see what's really there, you can stop and look. But also you could just play the game and fucking enjoy it.
It's interesting. There's plenty to unpack there. Alan Watts died from drinking himself to death, which I thought was incredible because it didn't seem to match up with you know, the guy that you hear on the audio at all. And you're totally right. He's really got a beautiful and very simple way of putting things, and he's very entertaining. I
would say to a degree, just because you understand doesn't mean that you can really, to use the words of Alan Anderson and Krishnamurti, you can't truly abide in that just because you have a conception of it. It's the mere problem having the conception, right? You understand it too well to forget.
Exactly. Yes.
So it's actually not surprising to me, because if you look at a majority of the great thinkers, and how their end came to be. It seems to be a consistent
understanding does not necessitate application.
right. Yeah, just because you understand something doesn't mean you're going to apply it. And also, like that idea of like the more that you understand, the more you're filled with something.
Sure.
To understand something, you have to grasp the concept, right? And so it is the act of grasping that disallows you from being in that moment, which is definitely, like, I would say that's completely congruent with my experience over the past couple of years. The more I've been obsessed with this idea, the less and less I could focus on the act of being. And really over this last year, specifically in the last couple of months when everything was coming to this crazy fruition of understanding, those were like legit the hardest months of my life for no reason. And I mean, it definitely plays into this idea of like the hero myth and, you know, the transformation, you know, rescuing your father from the underworld and all of that, where you have to sort of go to this place that's deep and dark to figure out like what actually is, and, you know, like how you play into those things. But I wouldn't say it's just that. Like there's something else to it. That is interesting. I didn't know that he drank himself to death, but I'm not surprised because of that line of reasoning.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. It's sort of like what Anthony Peake was saying is the only way to get to this. You know, we're talking about getting people to this place. It's by putting them into a psychological crisis. That is really the point. That's the only way to guarantee it. And we're not talking about something that just, you know, a pure neuroticism. Obviously that would not cut it. I don't know if we want to go too far down there, but I did want to go back to what you were saying about the raised circle and talking about language. As far as the sensor, the observer, talking about, you know, language as being what instantiates that. I don't know about that. There's a book that Anthony Peake talked about in the very beginning of the podcast by Julian James. It's called The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown in the Bicameral Mind. And he thinks that there was some sort of traumatic event which created this bicamerality. And he thinks that the first people to develop an ego started hearing a voice in their heads. Basically were the first people to have inner dialogue, and they just assumed, oh shit, this is God.
Yeah, he touched on that, which actually plays perfectly into the way that Peterson, I don't know if you've heard his recent discussions on the biblical series. I haven't seen all of them, but specifically the one about, actually I think it's in his book that he mentions it, but he's talking about Adam and Eve and this idea of, you know, the tree from the fruit of knowledge. Like that concept was, you know, in that moment, those two were living purely in the state of flow. They had nothing to worry about. Knowledge was not something that they had, right? And the snake tempted them, and the snake represents, you know, this dark side that we have to ourselves, and exposed us to the ability to have knowledge. And I think it said something to the effect of, like, once they've eaten from the tree of the fruit of knowledge, they have the knowledge of the gods, but it's not the omnipotence that you would desire. It's an awareness of the things, and it's something like that sort of was the split that leads down this road of, you know, possibly into this. I'm not familiar with the bicameral mind and how exactly it's structured, but it sounds like it could fit very, very well into that if it's something like these portions of the brain that are at odds with each other.
Well, I am no biblical scholar, and I have not read Julian Jaynes' book, although my father gave me his copy a couple of years ago. I have not. It is dense as fuck, but it's tough. And one of the things that I really liked about Krishnamurti, it's kind of the same reason why I don't recommend him to hardly anyone at all. That's why I'm super grateful that you checked it out. And
oh, dude, I devoured it. It was so enjoyable to sit and ponder on all of those things. And it awesome, really, it really like, it put everything together in a way that all of the other people were like building up to. And I feel excited to go with what's next. And that's definitely something that tricking has always brought me to, and why I refuse to quit. Even though the rational person in me is like, yo, you need to stop wasting your money trying to like make businesses in this, because like this is not a viable source of income for your life if you want to build a family or anything, or if you just want to like eat food and stuff.
Right.
And
exactly.
So, but there's something to it that, like, literally the thought of leaving entirely and just turning my back on tricking, anytime I truly gave that any weight, made me feel like ill, like I couldn't stomach the idea to pursue something like that. And it's only now that I finally am starting to see these things in a way that I can do something with, you know, and that aren't just like, it's almost like I feel like I can almost articulate why tricking matters. And I feel like that's one of the first steps to truly spreading this thing. And I think that it's, and I told you about this in our last talk, I believe, that when we first started Torque, it was, you know, this company that we were trying to, like, we had design and we loved tricking and it was part of a school project, but we were like, no, this could be like a cool thing that's real. And we just sort of pursued that. But like a year or two in, it wasn't that anymore. And we never really like nailed it down and like said what it was precisely. But people would ask me what my mission statement was. And it was always something to the effect of, you know, I want to help unlock the potential in other people. And I guess the way I was thinking about it at that time was something to the degree of, I want to give these people opportunities that they might not have otherwise had. I want to give them a possible platform that they could elevate themselves on to become noticed. But what I got was something so much more than I thought, because I said that, and it was only during the talks with Krishnamurti where I was only really like hearing each word from time to time. There were many times where,
yeah, I don't know how you listen to all that shit so quickly, man. You know,
you
must have felt like Neo getting unplugged after learning kung fu.
Oh, no. There were definitely moments where I legit would just have to turn off all noise and just lay in my bed to just like let things process through. I did have to listen to his talks in regular speed the first time, which is not
He's
like
actually great to listen to.
oh no, he
125.
Oh, so I went a full 2 times, and he's still doable if you.
Yeah, it's definitely doable.
Ideas. It's like Peterson. Peterson is like, you should watch him at 2 times speed just to like save yourself some pauses.
Mm-hmm.
But it's good. But let's see, where was I going? Yeah, so it seems to me that tricking, and it's not just tricking. There's so many ways to access this state, but it seems to me that tricking is a very direct shortcut due to some of the aspects that it has involved with it. And so like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the guy who, you know, sort of started this school of positive psychology and this research on the flow state back in the 1970s, he outlined it as having 8, and I was reading a paper more recently on like PubMed, and they had outlined it as 17, which ultimately I think they just broke these 8 down into a couple separate ones. But so like 1 is it has clear goals, and he goes on to elaborate those clear goals as an objective is distinctively desired, and you can also have immediate feedback. So there are parameters in which you are trying to operate, and it seems to be something like those parameters are the problem, but also that's the turbulence. Right, going back to this idea of flow and fluid mechanics. So that turbulence and that immediate feedback is extremely important, because it gives us a sense of placement in the hierarchy of how well we're doing, right? And so it could be like for me, painting a car is a great source of flow. And partially why I've been having a rough time recently. I haven't been able to get to work and do that thing that gives me that feedback. And tricking does it to a degree, but for me, I don't have the particular goals to really engage with it. But with painting, I'm forced goals. And so I clearly see the problem. And so it's just, I think it's because I've tricked so much when I did have goals in the past that I can easily dive into it at work. But like you can see each moment that you're sanding something down, whether you're moving closer or further from what the end result needs to be. But you aren't thinking about that end result. You're thinking about what's happening in that moment and how you're sanding, because if you miss sand, then you've wasted 30 minutes and you have to let something dry again and set up. And like, you know,
right.
So there's something at stake here, you know, and that's why tricking and, you know, the book that really sent me down this pathway was The Rise of Superman. I was mixing it up with the second one. So The Rise of Superman by Steven Kotler specifically goes into the aspect of flow when it comes to athletes and, you know, extreme athletes, and how are they developing at such a rapid rate and, you know, growing so rapidly. And it's because they have all of these things that are relevant to pushing you into that flow state. So moving on to the second one, the skills are suited to the challenge. I talked about this at length earlier in the different states between boredom, flow, anxiety. The only one I didn't touch on was apathy, which is when there's low or no skill and challenge. So it's basically, you know, watching TV, doing absolutely nothing. So then from 2, you move into 3, where action and awareness merge. And that's where, you know, Krishnamurti's ideas really come into play. And it's like the doer, the observer stops observing and becomes the doer, right? And so that seems to be what Csikszentmihalyi is talking about in 3. 4 is the concentration on the task at hand, which is sort of a given when the action and awareness merge. So it's interesting how like the first one falls into the second one, falls into the next one. So then it moves into the part where most people don't necessarily get to. And it might be because of, you know, they're just not open to the idea, but it's the loss of self, you know, the ego death in a way, a sense of growth. And then he also describes a connection to something bigger than oneself. And this is 6 moving into 7, which is the altered sense of time that comes with flow. And so that's it's really interesting the way that time seems to have the ability to stretch and contract at will to meet the necessity of the task at hand, right? So in our talk, we spoke for over 4 hours the other night.
Yep.
And it was moments in my experience. And that's so hyper contradictory to the feeling when you're in the center of a tricking move and time itself has stopped for you to be able to control each muscle movement as you're flying through the air, and not only be aware of the ground and your body and the muscles, but that kid who's running across the gym, and if you don't pull your leg in on this kick, you're going to decapitate him. And literally 9 times out of 10, the tricker is in that flow state, and they're in that moment to the point where they don't hit that kid. Now, why is that? It's because they're completely responsible in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And that moves in to number 8, which is the experience becomes autotelic. And what autotelic is, I mean, you know, but what autotelic is when something is done simply to do it. It is an end in itself. You know, there is no, I'm painting this picture and it has to look a certain way. A true painter paints to paint. Trickers trick to trick. You know, someone commented on my status earlier, my post in the group, and it was like, I trick, therefore I am. And I responded with, actually, yes. Because that's it. Like, in that moment, that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely agree with you there. I mean, I've seen people not all that responsible when they're tricking people flying into each other and shit. But I don't think
that those people aren't truly in flow then.
Exactly. In your studies and all these other researchers, is there anyone who's sort of comes up with a number, whether it's right or wrong, or if it's some generalization? How much of the general United States population has experienced the flow state?
They do mention it in one of them. I'll have to find it. I think I have it bookmarked in some of the things I was reading. I'm just now starting to get out of the layman territory and into the academic world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like I've gotten all that I can get from when they're trying to talk to the average person. And specifically, I'm fascinated by this neuroscience that's tied with the flow state, right? And so, like, it seems to be that there's something magical and beyond addicting about about these flow states, especially with like the production of these 5 endogenous neurochemicals, and like how those neurochemicals that are produced within the brain. I'll see if I can name them off right now: anandamide, endorphins, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and serotonin. Nailed it. Each of those are tied with the 5 most commonly used illicit drugs, and their purpose that they serve within the brain are various things. So like one gives you the feeling of good and like the positive feedback, which is associated with cocaine. And then there's things like ecstasy, which is your serotonin, which is the feeling of love and connection and, you know, deeper meaning. And then you have norepinephrine, which is, you know, your meth, and it's your jump start to the system, your superpower. You're literally on drugs in that moment, even though you didn't take anything. And then you have, which one am I missing? Cocaine. So cocaine is your dopamine receptor. And that gives you this feeling that you're on top of the world and what you're doing is right, and that positive feedback loop. And it's interesting. It almost sort of ties in with some of the things that Brett Weinstein, however you say his last name, gets into with this idea of evolution and how the brain will reward itself for things that it thinks might keep it alive and propagate across time. You know, right. These are the sort of ideas that people like Dawkins are really getting into, the idea of memes and how genes have their own propagation, but then memes are like the propagation of ideas forward. And
information.
What?
Information.
Yes, information.
Yeah.
And so those things are, the brain is giving us all of this feedback to sort of yell at us and scream like, hey, this is the thing that you should be doing. You should be doing this. This is what we want. This is the best. And if we were to sort of figure out how to fall into that more readily, more naturally, it would tie back into things like what Peterson's talking about, which is, you know, take some responsibility. And he means it not in the Krishnamurti way, but in the, you know, pick something heavy up and try and walk with it. And that also ties into things like what Ian McGillichrist is saying about the balance between the brains and these ideas across different religions, specifically the Eastern philosophies and Taoism, and sort of this balance between things, and how, like, you know, you only know the darkness from the light. And like we can't purely live in the flow state 100%, because if we only lived in that moment of purely being, there would be absolutely no appreciation for those moments that we completely forget ourselves, right? And Alan Watts touches on this in some early talks, where he's talking about, like, once you've gone there, once you've attained it and gotten everything that there is to get about the world, you simply come back and you be a postman, and, you know, you scoop ice cream, and that's what you do. You come and you play your role, you play the game, and you put on a great show for everyone. And like, I didn't understand what he was talking about, but I definitely understand what he's talking about now.
Right.
And it's like, there is so much more, but it isn't what matters right now. What matters right now is right now, because, like, we already know everything. We're just playing this game of pretend that we don't. And that's what's fun. And it's the act of playing this game that it's autotelic, you know, like we do it to do it.
When you say this game, you're talking about tricking?
I'm talking about everything.
You're talking about everything. Okay. As far as
also tricking, I mean, tricking is, I would say that the things that we do in everyday life are a macro of life putting itself on for consciousness.
Macro. Okay.
Like they're just different levels of abstraction. And like that's the thing. And like I really loved Peterson for giving me that terminology, because it has allowed me so much freedom of movement within my own thoughts. This idea of levels of abstraction, you know, of looking at the problem and how a thing at one level may have very little to do with something at another level, even though they have many parallels. You know, they might veer away from themselves, which is also coherent with across physics, you know, this idea of quantum mechanics not behaving like the standard model.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I would also say that to a degree, like when I'm speaking to you right now and saying all of these things, mm-hmm. It's not fully like there isn't someone filtering. Like these ideas are flowing.
Yes, right. Yeah.
You know, they come from the place that is, you know, the wealth of knowledge that I've amassed. So it is me, but it's not the person who worries about bills. Because there are things that, like, you know, maybe a little bit less so in this talk, more so in the heat of our last talk, but there were moments where I was completely like amazed at the things that were being pieced together and coming out of my own mouth, that I was like, oh my gosh, that's fascinating. Who told you that? And it's like, I told you that. Well, who is I? It's which actually that who is I reminds me, this is my favorite Alan Watts quote. There was a young man who said so. It seems that I know, but I would like to see is the I that knows me when I know that I know that I know.
Jesus.
It's a mouthful. I had to write it down.
I really enjoy Alan Watts. I every time I listen to him, I misremember him. I'm always like, oh, he's too corny or whatever, you know.
You know, and I was the same way. I was the same way, and I think what it is like I said earlier, he's a very digestible version of this. He's Taoism light, you know. He's, you know, coffee to go, as opposed to someone making a crazy, ridiculous, like what are they called, where you have like the fucking double boiler coffee, and like that's where Krishnamurti's going to. He's like, no, let's get the science tools out. Let's make this complex. Let's take this to its limits and really push it. And Alan Watts seems to be something like, listen, man, you put the grounds in the cup and you drink it. It's coffee. Don't worry. And it's like people can understand that. They're like, oh, I get it. But he's fully get it, but they get it enough to act some of it out. And that's what's important, you know?
I don't know. I think so for me, when I listen to Alan Watts, something, well, actually before I do that, because I meant to say this earlier, you were thanking me for the Krishnamurti talks.
Oh yeah.
I was trying to get this out though. The reason that I like him is because when you're talking about, you talked a little bit about when one person uses the word, you know, it means something, then, you know, you have all these problems brought about by language because we don't know the sense in which someone's using a word, or at least we can't guarantee the certainty. And at least on the surface, for almost everything, you know, there might be some exceptions here and there. Krishnamurti's emphasis is no specialized knowledge. I'm going to talk to everyone as if they're a layman. It doesn't mean this is going to be easy, but I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk on end about a particular passage of the Vedas, or I'm not going to talk in psychological terms.
Right. Well, and he's taking an approach very similar to Alan Watts, which is, let me distill this cumbersome usage of language that people through the ages have attempted to sort of grasp the ungraspable with.
Mm-hmm.
Let me work around it such that people will start to see the empty space that is left within what I say, right? And so you just continuously talk around the thing as much as you can until you've outlined it entirely. And it kind of comes back to this idea of truth as the elephant and the 7 blindfolded men, and each of them reaching out for the truth and, getting pieces of it. But when they describe it to one another, it no longer sounds like anything. But it's only once you can really look at everything pieced together in a way that you can start to see what is between them.
Yeah, well, Alan Watts it's a little bit less simple from a reductionist view, because he tells stories, he's poetic, but in many ways much more simpler than Krishnamurti, obviously, because he's talking to people who are culturally attuned to the way that he's saying things. He introduced in a very legible way Taoism to the West, in ways that people could understand, and all other sorts of manners of Eastern thought, and he's great. He's really great. I don't know if you've heard of Osho before.
I've not.
All right. Well, I really like Osho, but Netflix came out with a documentary on him recently. He got murdered by the government, but he was some guru out of Oregon, and he was riding around in Rolls Royces and all this other shit. But the reason I bring him up, he'd be a fascinating person for us to talk about, but not today. The reason I bring him up is he talked about Krishnamurti in a book, which is a compilation of his favorite books. And he says, I love Krishnamurti's truth, but I hate his writing. I hate it. It's awful. And I hate his teaching because of it. And I was like, yeah, I completely understand that. And, he said in a talk at one point, I think it's one of the first talks that I heard of him, he said, look, if you come here today and when you leave, you think, oh man, I really found something, listening to Krishnamurti. I sat and I listened to him and I think I found something. Said, if you leave with that, I've completely failed and you've completely failed.
Yes, no, I would completely agree. Let me see if I can find the other thing that I wrote down when I was thinking. It's like, okay. Is it that one? No. Okay, so this was something that, like, right after I finished the talks, I was literally laying in bed trying to go to sleep, and I didn't do it, but I sat up and I wrote in my book, and it says, my mind is shouting like a child, jumping up and down, exclaiming, I understand, I get it. Now I know how to forget. I see, and then in doing so, negates true understanding, which is actually forgetting yourself. And I'm starting to come to the words again, but it seems to be, oh, you know what? I fucking tweeted it. I was like, I put it somewhere out in the world, and I don't remember where. And I found what I was looking for only to understand there was nothing there to look for. That's about as good as I could sum it up.
Say it again.
I found what I was looking for only to understand there was nothing there to look for. I definitely feel like I've been searching for something for like the last 5 years. And literally on December 31st of 2018, like there was just this moment where I was like, fuck. There's nothing. The thing you're looking for, you'll never find because there's nothing to find because you know it. And like I said, language, it's too cumbersome.
Yeah, I'm a little bit puzzled when Krishnamurti talks about being completely responsible and always being able to respond completely adequately. Because I mean, sometimes the truth of the matter is you're confused. You know, I get fucking confused. Like there's no answer. There's no solution to this.
Then I guess Krishnamurti would contend in that point that when you're confused, you're not looking properly. And I could actually agree with that because I would say I've encountered some fucking amazing problems. And I say amazing in like a horrific, but like it would make a good movie sort of way. I think I've told you about some of my encounters with malevolence and, you know, just the things through the years. But I never, like I was living, and this was in like, I would say that I got distracted when I was 23 and a half because I was looking so hard to find what I found. And because like I really was living from 21 to 23. Like, and I mean like in the truest sense of the moment. And when I was doing that, it was right after I had, you know, really explored Alan Watts fairly thoroughly. And I had gotten through Think and Grow Rich a couple of times and started to like understand what he was getting at there. And which actually interestingly ties into parts of what Krishnamurti was saying, which we can explore later. But you know, it was around that time when I was doing it, and I was just, you know, each moment flowed into the next thing without having to worry about whether it was going to work out. You know, like I moved to Colorado only to have the place that Rudy and I were supposed to live in. It was a scam, and we lost the majority of our money. We had like less than $1,000 to each of our names. I started trading stocks on the stock market, on the penny stock market, managed to pay my bills for the first several months with that until I could get a regular job to move into a place. And like all through that time, people, you know, came out of the woodwork and were just like, hey, we've got a place for you to stay. And like things really just fell into place without effort. And, you know, even complex problems would resolve themselves within seconds for me. And it was literally the universe handing me it on a silver platter. And it seems to be something like, have you read The Alchemist?
No, but I know what you're talking about. Paul Coelho.
Yes. Okay. So one, read that book. It for sure was my Bible that I lived by through those times. I read that book around the same time, actually before I read Think and Grow Rich. And it was, to me, more important the way that it was structured. So he talks about, there's this idea of beginner's luck. I believe that I was experiencing something to the effect of beginner's luck for a few years. And and it was only once I got past that. I've spent the last year or so in the China shop. Once you read it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But I would say in my life right now, I'm somewhere in the China shop, which the China shop is where he realizes he's about to give up. He's basically resolved to the point of, okay, I'm going to, you know, stop pursuing my personal destiny, and I'm going to fall back to that which I know, which is my safety. And there's this moment and these people that he encounters right as he's at the cusp of breaking that provide him with this sense of you have to do it. You have to follow your dream, which was to go to the pyramids in Egypt and find this treasure that's there waiting for you. And literally the shopkeep that he'd been working for gives him, you know, the shopkeep's life savings, which was, you know, he's a Muslim, and one of the things that they have to do is, you know, go on their pilgrimage. And that was for his pilgrimage. That was his pilgrimage money. And he was like, you know, I think this is more important for you to go to the pyramids at Egypt and see what you can find there than it is for me to go to, you know, to do my thing. I think this is my thing, is sort of what he's saying. And so it's a very, very good book, the way that it's outlined, but the hilarity of it is the way it comes to a close. And I won't ruin it for you, but it's just, it's the nature of things.
Okay, the nature of things. All right.
Like, it's, you know, it's like what I was talking about, where, you know, what I was looking for was never there to begin with. It's something to that effect, but slightly differently. It's a good book. It's a fiction,
Right.
But
no, my ex had read that one. So here's my issue here, because this is one of the things where, and again, the way we got into this was Krishnamurti and talking about responding adequately. What seems to be the most responsible thing is to understand the meaning of your confusion or your inadequacy when it comes up. Because, like, let's say we're not worried about you know, your money or whatever. Like, let's say that you're a young idealist in college, and you go to class and you realize, you know, half the world is in poverty, and there's a good percentage of people who are starving to death, and you feel like you need to do something, and you just simply, you know, don't come up with it. You don't crack it. You know, there's a lot of people who've been at it. You just don't crack it. What is the meaning of that? Why can't you figure it out?
I would argue that you're not looking at the problem properly, because in the 7th grade, I figured out that you can't solve everyone's problem, because there is this thing called the individual, which in itself, I literally in the 7th grade wrote a paper on the giver, and like came to that realization of like, no, as long as there is individual people, unless you truly remove that from the person and what makes us ourselves, you can't solve everyone's problems. People have to solve their own problems. They have to come up, you know, against something and, you know, contend with it, as Peterson would say. You know, like they have to go on their own journey, which, like, it comes back to this idea of it being a game and a play. And, you know, it's like the journey is that play, and part of that is failing. But I mean, back to your point earlier, you know, seeing the inadequacies, you know, of that confusion, that definitely I think plays into it, you know, because you're ultimately looking at it factually and not having an ego tied to it that's saying that you're competent enough, but rather looking at the problem more objectively and saying, okay, where am I lacking, and how does someone improve that area? And you know, that would tie back into this chart of like boredom versus flow versus, you know, these other states that you can be in. It's sort of a spectrum scale that you can move throughout during your life based on your competency, which is something that Peterson constantly comes back to, is, you know, become competent in something, find something difficult and learn to understand it, which in some of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work on creativity, he does a ton of interviews with all of these different people that are exceptional in their field of, you know, art and graphic design and surgeons, people in the field of medicine, and just highly creative people. And he asks them all of these questions, and they ultimately inform what led him to arrive at flow and this state of flow. But it seems to be that they all have these characteristics where these people were obsessed with understanding a certain domain, and domain in the sense of like a field of study. So like within their domain, they became competent to a point because of their interest in it, and because it was to a degree autotelic for them to spend time imbibing in that knowledge and accepting that into their bucket. Later on, those people have this wealth of experience and of knowledge to draw from in that flow state, which is why they don't encounter confusion, because they have properly, you know, directed themselves through life, and, you know, they were paying attention enough to notice those inadequacies and quickly remedy them before it was necessary. It seems to be something like that.
Okay. So those inadequacies, if we're talking about the flow state, and we're talking about something that's challenging enough, but there's never any breakdown. That breakdown, what is
when you say there's never any breakdown, what do you mean by that?
A complete the thing has taken you. You've been subdued by it. Say you don't have a crisis of purpose. Let's see there. I guess you could get injured if we're talking about tricking, but not even necessarily. Because every time we talk about this, like I sort of want to encourage it and say, yes, people need this. This is a good in, and especially if they've never experienced it in something other than, you know, I don't know, just a fleeting moment here or there, but in something where they're cultivating their talent. And yes, but I see a little bit of me getting nervous around the idea, like, yes, this is what we should advocate. As long as these things are in place, we're good to go. Simply because there's all sorts of
tricking as like a gateway to the flow state.
Well, whatever it might be, right? Like, because I mean, these people are writing about the flow state, and it's kind of hard to, you know, they obviously give examples, but they're trying to outline this existential happening, this event.
Yeah, so a subjective experience.
Yeah. And again, I'd hazard to give other examples, but there are certainly focal practices, things that people do which are not good for the community in which they dwell, where they are able to experience that to one extent.
Definitely. Oh, no. And that's where I would say we start getting a bit more into where Peterson comes into play in all of this. Because I would say that almost everyone that I've encountered as far as, you know, academics and thinkers in that sense, they have something to offer this problem. And, you know, much like Anderson Peak, I feel like the people talking about it just won't put their pieces together. And so when it comes to this idea of malevolence and of, you know, there being a possibility for something that is not good, and what that might look like and how we could possibly conceptualize that. There are plenty of things that give us flow that are not beneficial to us and to our moving forward. You know,
how do we know that?
That's something that the person himself, the individual, is going to have to contend with. And, you know, that's not a journey that any of us can go on with someone else. You know, it's like these people who are going on these, you know, deep ayahuasca retreats, and like I hear these reports and these discussions, and, you know, how it was, and it's interesting, and it's congruent, and that's the thing that really makes me go, huh, there's something here. There is a pattern here, and patterns are important. You know, they're extremely important. And one of my favorite patterns, my absolute favorite pattern, is the Fibonacci sequence. And the reason for that, I didn't understand. I just gravitated towards it as soon as I found it in like middle school, high school. We started talking patterns, and, you know, it's, you know, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and then it goes on from there. But the way it's constructed is in the golden ratio. It's one block on top of the other block that are, you know, perfect squares. Those two combined together, the thing that builds upon them next is 2. And then, you know, it's as you formulate these blocks in the shape, with these numbers being, you know, denoting the area, you see how it all fits together in this spiraling pattern that flows and, you know, as Krishnamurti would say, flowers out of itself.
Right, and, literally. We used to grow sunflowers at my house, and we would look at the Fibonacci through the sunflower.
Yeah, and
literally flowering.
So this idea of the thing before it, you add to that thing, and what comes after you is greater than the sum of you. You being both. And it seems to me that this pattern echoes something in that same sentiment, which is that, like, take tricking, for example, objectively, like as the moves themselves, not as a spiritual, you know, as the moves. Each generation, like, people are literally fucking jaw dropped right now based on the speed at which we have increased the difficulty of the domain, right? And so that's what tricking is with regards to flow state. These kids, they grasp the entirety of the domain before them. They take this, it's this idea of knowledge as this malleable circle that exists in infinite space, right? And knowledge is a finite sphere of, you know, of what it is. And this is just a way to visualize it, not a way of actually thinking about it. But So, you know, you think of it as a circle, and as someone pushes the boundaries of what we believe and conceive of as possible, they are basically poking and stretching at the edges of the perimeter, the circumference of that circle. And as they poke and prod and bust out of that and attain that thing just beyond what was conceived of as possible, you know, be it triple cork or quad or whatever we're working with at this point, each generation, as it comes into it, the previous generation may have more difficulty assimilating this as a possibility based on how they were, you know, brought up and how current they're staying with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the new generation, when they come into things, they see it as the domain that it is and the possibility to push beyond that domain.
Exactly.
And when they have that ability, that seems to be what is stretching the human race and really like on a level of like gravity defying, you know, things. And like I just hope to God that I live long enough to see Session be proved wrong when he said that there is a max. I believe he did the math on it.
5 spins.
Are you sure it's 5? I thought it was 8.
Oh, 8? I don't remember. I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it when he said it. So.
Either way, he said that there was a boundary, and I hope one of these children prove him wrong. And I pretty sure they will. And
I mean, with biotech, maybe, you know.
I don't even think with biotech. I think it's, you know, like as we evolve towards that thing, and the people within the tricking domain continue. Like, you want to talk about the weird shit that's happened in other domains that have been, you know, existent for forever. Right. And like, I definitely think that there is something going back to what you mentioned earlier about the repetition of things.
Right. So that's exactly what I wanted to tie it back into right here.
Yeah.
Which is because the reason tricking is such an accelerant, and particularly was for you and I, and seems to be less so now, is because just like everything, particularly with mysticism and communion with God, the road has been paved in all these, you know, many, many different conceptions, and it's already been laid out. And there are truths that need to either be reworded or worded the same but rediscovered in order for there to be this communion. Because what you were talking about with the raised circles, you know, there's not necessarily communication happening, but there's communion.
Yeah,
it's communion.
Yes, yes, you're right.
Which is completely different than communication. You know, something merely transferred or handed down.
Right. Right. Something passed along simply as a thing that can be passed versus something, as they would say, moving.
Moving, yes. Concurrent, as Anderson would say.
Right. It's interesting how it seems that so many people stop as soon as they get to a point, you know. And when I say people, I mean various thinkers and schools of thought and religions, and you know, it's and I understand why now, but it's just strange to me that that's where they chose to stop. I want to say I understand in the way that I can rationalize why they would stop where they stopped. And it's that to stop where they stopped allows for control and for the ability to manipulate and to push and guide certain preconceptions that the people who almost attained, not attained, but the people who almost properly forgot. they were still tied to their content of consciousness, and so they it's like they figured out how much can we give and stop just before, so that we could direct this flow into something that we could build a pyramid or a monolith, a mosque, you know, these cathedrals. You know, it's like why do these gurus, the ones who are speaking of what you and I are discussing right now, why do they not need anything? You know, why do they not have a monolith? Why? And I'm not asking for like, I need to know the answer. I'm just like putting the question out there for people. But like, why is it that those people need nothing yet have everything, versus the people continuously trying to grasp never seem to have enough? Like it seems to be like, you know, where Krishnamurti really set himself apart from all of those things. I think it says at the beginning of a lot of those talks, actually, like he concerned himself the complete freedom of man from religion or knowledge and all of these things.
Do you know what his backstory is?
Nope.
All right, I got to tell you this just quickly, because I know I don't know if this is going to get published or not, but if it does, people are just going to see, why the fuck they keep talking about this Krishnamurti guy?
Hey, dude, people are hungry for this. I believe that because I've had more contact with trickers that I've never met in the last 4.5 hours than I have in the last several months, because I posted like, hey, and I didn't even tell people what I was talking about. I just said, who's interested or has knowledge in the field of neurology, psychology, or philosophy? I'd like to discuss some ideas with you at length. And I got a ton of comments and people being like, hey, here's my credentials, you know, like, or I'm about to start getting credentials, and, you know, or I had several people just message me and be like, hey, I have no credentials, but what are you talking about? Like, well, I'm curious. And so I think we should publish this and see what people have to say about it. Because as Peterson would say, this is the truth that we are speaking that, for me at least, aligns my being rather than fragments it. And that's
right.
You know, to tie back into what you were talking about, is how do we know when flow is serving us? It's, I would say, flow that doesn't serve us. You feel the fragmentation. You know when you're missing it. And that's something that I'm definitely coming to realization is, you know, in focusing purely on these ideas in the way that I have been, I've been neglecting one of my aspects of flow, which is what we're doing right now, this conversation where we're coming and we're trying to attempt to approach the ideas, you know, of any sense, you know, whether it be at this level or at a lower level, but just like the willingness to like really like push both of our knowledges and our understanding of things to the edges of what we grasp and make new connections about that, you know? And so I would say that the opposite of that would be something like, you know, when you get high and play video games for 12 hours and you get that sense of flow. I've done that. I get that sense of flow, but it leaves me feeling empty. Like I feel good, but I feel empty and fragmented, and there's something that's missing. And when I feel that, there's no way of, you know, like, I mean, maybe it's neurologically present within, you know, some of the chemical markations that my brain is symptoming, but like more than that, in the very core of my being, you know, like from tip to toe, you just feel this like this sulk deeper into a depression that is not what I feel in this moment, you know? Like this moment I feel closer to the energy and like the goodness that can be felt. Am I making sense here? Like the moral compass is going off and it's like, no, this is fucking it. Like people can say what they want about it, but this is the moral compass of, you know, feeling like the responsibility that you're bearing is leading in the right direction and unifying, rather than the experience that you're enjoying is separating and fragmenting you, making it more difficult to go through things. It's a fucking lot, dude.
More difficult to go through things. Okay. Well, let's start with the video game. I forget Christian Marty's life story. You talked about like 8 different things that I was like, shit, I forgot to talk about that.
Oh, I forgot you even started on that. I think you set up on something.
Yeah, I know, man. I know. That's all good. But do you know what Peterson's definition of evil is?
I mean, I could probably talk around it, but what are you gonna say about it?
Well, it goes into the video game model and where I'm going to take it after, which is Peterson says evil is the knowledge that believes it is complete. And
it's virtue that thinks it's true virtue.
Yes, essentially, and that's why when we talk about, you know, getting in the flow state with a video game, you know, at the end you feel depleted, but you know, you're getting that dopamine firing. You know, hey, you maybe even be, you know, playing with your friend or bonding with. I've watched my cousins bond over it, you know, or they bond.
No, there are aspects of good to it. However,
well, they bond across the country playing Fortnite, and I'm like, Jesus, you know, I can barely even watch the thing. But what I'm saying is, there's short cycles and there's longer cycles. So the video game cycle is however long you can binge a video game, you know, which I'm not going to hazard to guess. Teens in 2018, you know, do 12-hour run.
Oh, bro, I'm an adult, and I'm pretty sure I did like 18 hours like a couple weeks ago because I haven't been working.
Sure.
But like,
sure.
I felt bad, and like not in a sense of like, I mean, I had a great time, but like there was just this like, I didn't want to eat food properly. I didn't want to like take care of myself. There was just no desire about it. It's this idea of the Matthew principle, and I'll stop right after this to let you continue. But, you know, to those who have, more will be given, than to those who have little, all will be taken away. It's like this idea of momentum and, you know, your success versus your failures. You start failing, you're going to fail more and more. You start succeeding, you're going to succeed more and more.
Indeed. Okay. If we're talking about the succeeding and the more and more, we have the Petersonian levels of analysis, and when you look at it, you have essentially, depending on the level of analysis, we're talking about completely different phase spaces, which are larger and larger and larger maps. So we have the phase space of a day or a month or a decade or your life and whatever it is.
Your maps of meaning.
So if precisely, sure. So if we're talking about, let's just talk about tricking, right? So if we're talking about tricking, you know, I don't know how many people have a 5-year plan. You know, maybe some people do plan ahead that far as training and things that they want to accomplish, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when we're talking about let's talk about a 10-year, 20-year, a 30-year. What do you want to do? Do you want to make some money in just a couple of video games? I mean, a couple of videos, and just and that's it, or is it possible that you leave a legacy, and that tricking does something more than just entertain us and make us feel great, get us more in tune with our bodies, help us communicate with each other? Maybe there is a cultural project which is not being touched upon because most of the bandwidth for talking about, okay, what are we going to do? How we get tricking big? How are we going to make it blow up? Maybe the wrong question entirely.
Oh, it's completely the wrong question, which is, it comes back to your essay. What is tricking? People aren't asking. And, Krishnamurti, he mentions it in the same way. It's like, you have to ask, like, what it is. You don't tell it what it is. You don't come to it with an idea and this thing of like, this is what it needs to be and how am I going to get it there? This plan. And it's not plan. It seems to be, I want to use the word faith, but faith seems lacking. Intention. This intention of a goal. That seems to be like the clear-cut goal within this idea of the flow state. Objective, distinctively desired is the way that he sort of puts it, and it's weird because I would almost say that it's like you have to go into it with a desire and an intention of a sort, but then as you go into that to act and do the move or the thing that's in that flow, you have to forget that is your end goal. Like I was talking about with painting, it's like there's a clear-cut goal and I completely understand it, but I'm not thinking about that. I know that that's what it is that needs to happen in the end. I'm doing the thing that needs to happen in the now so that the thing could happen in the end. But the thing happening in the end is merely a side effect of me doing the thing in the now. Does that make sense?
Yes, we're gonna stick with this. I'm gonna make you stick with this one.
Okay.
We're gonna reel it in here. This is why I want to stick with this, because this is one of the things that a lot of the people at the Krishnamurti Foundation don't understand, and it's just I don't understand how you could study the guy for a decade and not pick up on this. This is the problem.
36 hours, and I get it.
This is the problem here. When we're talking about not entering into abstract phase space as the overarching theme of all of your observation, it doesn't mean that it goes away or is subordinate to anything that's considered the present.
Now, when you say abstract phase space, please reiterate what you mean, because I kind of grasped it earlier, but not precisely.
Okay. So again, I'm using this term. I don't know where it's derived from, but this is John David Ebert using this, usually describing Heidegger. I think he's used it when he describes Kant as well. But essentially what it means is a map of meaning. That's really what it means.
From which thought can orient itself, something like that.
It is essentially it is a foothold for consciousness. It is essentially a complex. It is a point of concern or a constellation of points of concern.
Okay, I'm starting to envision a bit better. So it's like it's the content of consciousness.
It's not. It is. It is the content of consciousness, but it's not.
Not
It's
the observer.
not so general. It's
Not
not so
the-
general. It doesn't even require the observer, but it is what allows the observer to dwell with a particular image and distort that image. But when we're talking about, like, let's use the example of the painting.
Okay, I grasp it now.
Let's say that you are it doesn't matter if you're a professional painter or a regular painter or whatever.
Right.
You set out to do something. Maybe it's even experimental. At any point when the thing starts to come together, and you're you realize this thing is going to come to an end. By not privileging or negating it, you are essentially allowing it to come out and be. You're letting it be. That means if you let it be, it might be what takes you over and claims you and tames you and possesses you and forces you to finish it.
Yes. Yes. And that's, I think, comes back to you answering your own question in a way, which is, how do we, let me see if I can phrase this properly. Like, how do we take this? Yeah, I'm having trouble. Please continue talking while I try and piece it a bit better.
Well, I'm guessing you're talking about the question that I was asking is, what are people doing about tricking, and why is the problem so stunted?
Partially that. It was more about like how the ideas tie together with like denoting flow, right? So you're talking about like this place where you can truly let what is come to be. If you're actually doing that, and to use that word again, abiding in it, and taking it through your hands into the bucket, to use that analogy once again, then whether it is clean water or silty water, it's going into that bucket and it's making the bucket what it is, and it's your job to figure out how to direct that stream to put as little of the dirty water into your bucket as possible.
The bucket analogy. All right.
I live in analogies, bro.
Oh shit! No, I didn't.
Let's see here.
Would you say that I've missed anything, or I'm
it's all I'm always
a way that doesn't make sense or isn't congruent?
It's hard to say, because again, what we're talking about, things like which you're not sure if the language is an issue, or if even if
I know the language is an issue.
If it sounds like we've come to
a point of nonsense.
Even consensus, it's just like, okay, when we're talking about this kind of stuff, and I don't think Krishnamurti was able to do this all that well, because I mean, we had Krishnamurti.
Well, he said himself.
Look where we're at.
Right. Well, I mean, he said himself, like he never read, he experienced, he is what he is because he let it come to be.
But we had the career of Krishnamurti for over 60 years, and what has essentially happened is the complete degeneration of culture and of thought and of society.
I would agree.
He died in 82. So
yeah, and he talked about some things that were foreshadowing of what we have now.
Absolutely.
this devolution of the Western society and materialism and the need for things that we all require to fit into this bigger game, and how it distracts us from all of the things that aren't things. It's the language, you know, and like that's definitely part of the problem, and I think why tricking could offer part of the solution is because it's, like you said, a way to commune without communication. You know, when you drop away the communication and you give people, like, people throughout my tricking career over the last, 9 years. I started in 2010 in April. And like, I remember so many of the things about tricking, and they're so impressed onto the, you know, content of my consciousness, because they were
absolutely
pivotal in showing me down this road, which has brought me to the end, which is the beginning. And it's interesting because you always have to like put some sort of like, there's always some contradiction that has to be applied when we're using English. And I'm not bilingual or, you know, super familiar with other languages and their structure. I'd actually love to speak with a speech pathologist about some of these things, and about, you know, someone who's multilingual and studies speech and etymology. Be interested to have a conversation with those types of people. Right, I talked to her. There's always this contradiction, and it's this contradiction that can illustrate itself as the unitary whole, right? And so, like, you know, in Taoism and in all of these other things, like, you need this balance between what is and is not, and what moves and stops. And, you know, like, all of these things that are seemingly opposites, like, you only know hot from cold. Not like what does it mean to make this contradiction? And it's our way of describing it's like the balance between the things. And so, like, if that balance exists everywhere, it certainly exists within ourselves. So, like Peterson and, you know, McGillichrist talk about, we have to sort of balance ourselves and align ourselves on the good side, but balance, not go to the good side and stay there, but balance ourselves tending towards the good, you know, because it's like trying to balance a plate or a tray. You know, you have to change your position back and forth, going between one to the other to reach that equilibrium between them and actually reach that point of balance. Otherwise, the thing falls and everything is over. You know, the game stops. And so it's the alignment between the two, and the contending with the malevolent and the evil and the lethargic, the apathetic. You know, like, Peterson lumps those together, and I'm starting to understand why. It's because, like, what is it? The opposite of love isn't hate. It's something like complete disregard. You know?
Indifference?
Like, indifference, that's the word. If you could not even give the conception of that person a moment of your thought, that would be far worse than if you hated them. Because if you hate something, you hold it, you hold on to that. You know, hate is, it seems to be bad, but it's powerful in a different way, you know. But like, the it's am I making sense here?
You're on and off. No, but you're
You
right.
understand what I'm trying to point towards, though. This balance between things and how within ourselves, we're doing our best to toe that line, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the more that we're prepared to let both of those things happen equally, it's not necessarily going to be equal in the sense of 50-50, but, you know, in each moment being receptive to the possibility of something coming about and then going with that.
Yes. And again, the better, the more accuracy that we have, as far as relating that to, or reducing it to an intellectual justification of it, you know, and maybe necessarily doing so, the more that we tend to rest on that, to rest on our laurels. And that's what's concerning, because again, I do like Peterson.
100% agree.
I do like Peterson, but I have some problems with Peterson too. I'm very disappointed with him sometimes, and you know, especially when it has to do with him absolutely going against some of his most central pronouncements. Like if he just doesn't entertain a thought, or if he doesn't stick with something and he should just know better. And again, I don't know the guy. I don't know exactly what he's dealing with, and he may know a lot more than me in this thing that I'm upset with him about. But I know because I've seen it in myself. Mm-hmm. I'll talk about shit, and I'll pretend that I know what I'm talking about, or that I'll forget that I can err, and I talk to people about shit, and I just put on way too much confidence when it's just not just to do so, but I do so.
Right, but don't you feel that?
Not necessarily. Not until later.
But you feel it. It's not necessarily that something that's going to be an instant feedback to your character. Like I said, when I play video games, I feel good about it. But a couple days later, when I realize that I haven't done anything in a couple of days of purpose to me, you know, that's where it starts to settle in, this feeling of discontent and disarrangement and just pure discord, like a fragmentation, as Peterson describes it. And like I really think of it as, you know, like in the Harry Potter series, like the Horcruxes and the way that that's described. You know, I was definitely raised on like the Harry Potter series. We like listened to all of that shit, and I'm not sure if you're super familiar.
I really, unfortunately, I was talking to Isaiah about this. I haven't watched Harry Potter, man.
Okay, that's fine. So there's this idea within Harry Potter of this thing called the Horcruxes. And so essentially what it is an evil incantation, you know, a dark magic that can be utilized to fragment the soul and place it into things, into physical items in the world. And it's a way of creating an immortality within this domain. And so Voldemort, the evil character, he is trying to create this immortality. It's this guy whose name is Tom Riddle, and he was a student who was faced with malevolence, and he leaned into it. And when he leaned into it, he went down this road that he couldn't come back from. And when he came you know, came to this point of being Voldemort, he was so evil that he was literally fragments of himself scattered across the world in things. And, you know, if you take that as a narrative and as a, you know, possible archetype structure and apply it to something like, you know, going through life and feeling not connected and fragmented, and, you know, that being you leaning into the side of darkness and, you know, not going towards the light as it were, you know, you're going to feel that fragmentation. And like, that's why these books, you know, Peterson talks about it all the time. Like, why does this book matter? Why does this, you know, why does everyone give a fuck about The Lion King? Why do people watch Pinocchio? Why is this shit so old, but we still watch it and we're going to make our kids watch it? You know, like, why is that a part of our culture? And it's because it speaks to a truth that we know within ourselves, that it illustrates as a compass. And, you know, I think it's interesting, this idea of truth as truth, not as fact, and how they can be separated. It's interesting because, like, there's this material world that, you know, this would be like a part of the knowledge that Krishnamurti was talking about, is like this material world knowledge, like resources, time, like the understanding of how a car operates and what red lights mean, and like those things that are practical to get from point to point into, you know, do these things that are what's coming to be. You know, like there's a degree of that we need to have, but like you said, the repetition, our society we aren't paying attention. And it's fascinating that you mentioned brushing your teeth, because like this is something that I am like horrible about. Like I'm actually like, I'm legit embarrassed about how bad I am about brushing my teeth. And literally since like the last couple of days, it's been something that I've found such great enjoyment in. Like I've literally just like been taking the time to actually brush my teeth. And like really, and I don't mean like stand there and like, you know, move the brush around. I mean like I brush each tooth and like really like pay attention. I don't think about it, I pay attention. And it's interesting how that suddenly came about as this understanding came about of paying attention and coming to be,
Right.
as opposed to going through motions of this is what has to happen.
Sure, exactly, yeah.
Which is amazingly congruent with this idea of, to a degree, the way that people talk about a lack of free will. You know, they explain it as like this, you know, because like this experiment where the brain decided before the person thought to, you know, push the button, they actually would like, you know, it was pre-decided before you chose the button that you were going to press, type of thing.
Yeah.
Even if you
Kinda
wanted to choose. I've thought about that for a while, and I'm like, right, that's fine. I understand what they're saying, but I disagree, and I'm just going to hang on to that until I can explain it. And eventually I will come to the understanding where I can explain that concept. I'm not sure I'm fully there, but I might try to attempt it. So it's almost like this idea that we don't have free will isn't necessarily that there isn't a choice. It's that maybe the content of consciousness. This is where I'm still quite fuzzy. It may be the content of consciousness. It may be the observer, but something is the hand that the water flows through into the bucket, and it has some degree of power to direct that flow of water, of energy.
Okay. So I like to use the word agency, and there's a reason behind this. And I don't know how far we can get into this, but the idea of free will, it's funny. I was talking to Isaiah's friend. His name is Omri, and he works at Stanford and develops AI. And he has a background in neurology. And he was interested in consciousness, and we talked about free will with Isaiah's girlfriend, and he started pulling out all of these examples straight out of Sam Harris, and I said, "Okay, look, I know that's a Sam Harris reference.
Yeah.
The question is, okay, think of a movie, and then you think of a movie and you say it. Okay, think of another movie, and then you say it. All right. What made you think of that? See, that wasn't you, but you can't tell me why you came up with the name of that movie. And what happens is, for Harris and for a lot of people, the question is reduced down to, how do you know why you made the decision? And the problem that I have with that is, if you knew exactly why you made the decision, that's a argument for determinism and a lack of agency.
Right.
And not knowing is not any better. It doesn't tell you anything about agency. And the question's completely fucked up. But what Krishnamurti says in the Anderson dialogues is that, and this one fucked me up. There's a couple quotes like this that I said, I'm done with Krishnamurti. This guy's a fucking idiot. In choice, there's no freedom. Do you remember that one?
Yes. Good. Yeah, and I didn't let myself get hung up on it, but go on.
The mind that is forced to choose, okay? I'm going to choose my career. I'm going to choose what color tie to wear. If it shows up in consciousness and it stays there, and you weigh your options, or you don't even weigh your options, you make a conscious choice which shows up as the observer acting as an agent, you are essentially expressing the confusion of that agent in its freedom to express itself. So it's not really free at all. And the only real thing that you're free to do is to let observation inform your action and be completely intermeshed and coterminous with your action. Otherwise, you're just groping. You're going to make justifications for it. This is what is right. This is what is lawful. This is what God wants. This is what my culture dictates. This is what I personally want. I want pleasure. I want to have prestige. I want spiritual success. I want ascension, whatever it might be. And if you're not allowing the problem to completely imbue its own message and importance in and of itself, if you don't let it be, then you're doing a huge disservice to yourself, because you're essentially continuing some sort of cycle, whether it's the video game cycle or the sports cycle or the politics cycle or some spiritual cycle, whatever it is. You're denying yourself the ability to reincarnate now.
Yes,
you're making
Entirely. So
Yeah.
I would say it's something like, you know, Anderson Peak's game analogy where you're playing this game. It would be, you know, I think you used Laura Croft. It would be like
I better correct you because you've been saying Anderson Peak. So Anthony Peak.
Anthony.
Peak. Yeah,
Right.
sorry.
Anderson Peak.
Sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you the other times, but yeah,
No,
I just want
no,
to.
you are completely correct. I want to be correct in my references.
Cool. Sorry.
He's
Continue.
just someone who recently came into my domain. Anyways, so he talks about that Laura Croft, you know, video game and this idea of, so there's the controller and there's the video game character. And it would be like the video game character doing the first run, and you know, you walk 3 steps forward and there's a ditch and you need to press X to jump, but you just press forward and you walk into that. It would be like not taking that experience and learning to press jump and to make an adjustment to the course of the pattern so that, you know, it's not, so that it's the Fibonacci pattern and not a repeating pattern. It's not 1 1 1 1 1. It's 1 1 2 3. You know, it gets bigger and compounds, and the thing adds to itself.
It is a action of continuous relation across space-time, and it's ordered. There's an actual order to it.
Yes, there's an order to it, but there's a chaos to it.
There's a chaos in abstract phase space. In terms of taking apart different levels of analysis and comparing them with each other, it's chaos. But there is an order in observation, in seeing the disorder, in completely allowing that disorder to inform you, because
right.
If
which is something like being present and actually allowing what is come to be, because what is might not necessarily be what you fucking wanted it to be, but it's what is. And if you're really alive and ready and prepared and, you know, accepting of that moment, you'll go through that and move through it. You know, you won't get caught in it. And if you're not properly living, you're going to get caught on that thing. And that's going to be the thing that, like you said, might take you down. And it's because you get caught and hung up on it and you don't allow it to reincarnate now. Like, you don't die to that moment and let it inform the greater unconscious of your content of consciousness, but instead you set it apart from the content of consciousness as something that couldn't be a part of the content of consciousness and fragment yourself.
Say that again.
You set it apart from your content of consciousness, thus fragmenting yourself. You know, it's like, because you're tied to that thing, that point of contention, that's tethering you to the past, that's not allowing you to move forward. It's, you refuse to accept that is also a part of your content of consciousness, that failure is also you. It's something like that, and that's what creates the fragmentation, because you can't just let it be and let it be what was. It has to be a part of what is coming into being, but that's not what it is. That was very wordy. I hope you grasped it. Yeah.
We're moving pretty quick, considering the content that we're on. We're moving very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you remember last time we were flying at 1,000 miles per hour.
Oh no, I think we dwelled a little bit on that one. We were able to. I mean, it's like we kept talking, but you know, there was a little bit more of a thread to that one. This one I feel a little bit scattered. I don't know. But the toothbrushing thing is interesting. About midway through the week, last week, I don't know why, I just decided I want to improve my handwriting. And I looked at a bunch of videos on YouTube, and I didn't like it. It's all like really campy stuff for kids.
Oh yeah.
And I found this woman, and for the first 4 minutes, she doesn't talk about techniques. She doesn't talk about anything at all other than how she doesn't like the smell of a Sharpie marker, how she likes the feel of gel pens, how she likes the feel of fountain pens. And she talks about the tactile experience of writing. And that completely changed my whole idea. And I started learning calligraphy and bought a fountain pen, and I'm enjoying it. Now, it's new and it's novel. And one of the things I want to try to stay on this just for a minute. What I ended up doing, I didn't watch her videos. I downloaded a PDF from, let me see what year it was from. I downloaded this PDF from the early 1900s. It's a business writing course. It's called Palmer's Guide to Business Writing. 1894 is its original publication date. And the whole thing is very, very formal, and they take it very, very seriously. They're trying to train penmen who are going to be ostensibly writing all day, so they don't want their hands cramping.
Right, literally people writing the books.
Yeah,
like
penmen.
Not writing for the purpose of like.
Well,
okay,
no.
Like
They've gone through the printing press and all that, but like they're going to be working for a business, and they have to be constantly drafting memos and writing quickly, right? So they're not a scribe or some shit like that, but this is a business course basically.
Okay,
but
got you.
And the emphasis is on not remaining conscious of the strokes, but allowing there to be a flow. And one of the words that he uses, he's trying to say, look, you cannot be spasmodic. And that's essentially where, like, you know, when you're writing cursive or when you're scribbling something down as fast as you can, you're not conscious of the movement of the pen really at all. You're just thinking of the letters and you get the shit out, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And what he's trying to do is make sure that there is a constant sense of deliberation throughout.
Yeah, you're drawing each letter. You are, and when I say drawing, I mean drawing in the sense of creating form from line.
Creating form from line, yeah. But there has to be a content
writing.
What's that?
I would say that's different from writing. Like most people think writing as jotting something down, as simply creating a marcation. Whereas, you know, when you get into calligraphy, it's considered an art form because you literally are drawing each, like you say, stroke. You have to be deliberate with it, which ties interestingly into art and like how art and artists see the world and how you have to see the world as an artist. You know, one of the first things most art teachers do in like middle to high school art when they're teaching a drawing course is they give you this complex painting that's this guy on a horse, and they tell you you're going to draw this. Not you're going to trace it, but you're going to draw it. And everyone looks at this complex thing and they see it and they see all of the things and they're like, I can't draw a guy on a horse with a sword and all of this crazy shit. Like, I have no idea where even to start. And so what the teacher does is they say, everyone flip the page upside down. And when you look at this particular drawing, it's a specific like picture, because when you flip it upside down, it looks like nothing. it looks like patterns and lines and form. And you can start to break it apart into the things that make it up and see it for what it truly is. You know, instead of coming to it, as Krishnamurti says, with an idea of what it is, you don't come to it with this picture of I'm drawing the horse right now, because you have no sense of up or down when you're looking at it from this angle. You're simply recreating, you're looking, actually looking at this image and saying, what do I see? And then you're taking from that and making your own version of that shape. And it was interesting because everyone would draw it, and you know, at the end of class, you know, you weren't allowed for the entirety of the drawing to flip it upside down and look at it from the other angle. Like, you would actually get in trouble for it. So you had to like keep it upside down and just continue working on it. And then at the end of class, when everyone flipped it upside down, each one had their own essence to it and their own, you know, their own type of line that they would make. Some were, you know, very dark, and some were really light, and some were flowy, and some were very rigid. But almost every single one of them managed to capture, to a degree, the form that is recognizable as the man on the horse with all of the things that were associated with that picture. And it's interesting because that's within art, and it's like something that's so fundamental to it that like a good artist just picks that up and starts doing it. They just can't explain it. But it's like when I look across the room at my dog's cage, I see that it is, you know, made up of all these rectangles. Well, if I started to just draw that from my conception of it, I would draw it completely wrong, because what's over there isn't actually rectangles. It's so many different things. Like, there's rectangles, there's trapezoids, there's small lines, there's small diamonds. Things are on various angles and different, you know, different planes. And if I didn't actually pay attention and look at that, to use a famous colloquialism, I'd miss the forest for the trees.
Right. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, the thing about the writing is, you know, normally the writing is a means to an end. I'm trying to get down this idea, some sort of transcendent, you know, thing that's not about the paper. It has nothing to do with, you know, getting pleasure out of pen strokes.
Right. Well, that's where you get lost, because you're seeking something.
No. There's not. That's not necessarily the case.
No. That's what I'm saying is, like, when you're talking about that, you're saying this isn't the case and it's good. And I'm saying precisely it's good because you aren't seeking. It's when you're looking for that end and it's not being autotelic that it gets lost. Would you not agree?
Here's where I'm trying to go with the writing thing.
Okay.
Because you know, I really had a passion for martial arts. I enjoy doing all sorts of other shit. You know, this writing thing for me is extremely difficult and frustrating and enjoyable. And I really think that it encapsulated this thing, this flow state thing, because it was the right combination of everything. And, you know, I figure out that I'm doing it for 2 hours at a time, just rewriting the same word over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really enjoyable. Now, eventually, it'll either, you know, wane and I'll stop doing it, or it'll become, you know, a ritual, or it will be a real expression of a inquiry and a passion And that's what I'm sort of trying to get at when we're talking about all of these other larger cycles. Now, if I try to make it one or the other, and I don't actually see it for what it is, you know, if I lose interest and I force myself to do it, or if I just don't allow myself to take my time with it and be informed by it, and I'm lazy or something like that, that'd be a problem. But when we're talking about whatever it is, painting, tricking, business acumen, whatever it is, writing in terms of, you know, correct grammar, or writing in terms of, you know, writing a book or nonfiction or a novel, whatever it is, the act of thinking has to become the main thing to be observed. That has to be a I thought about it when I titled this. The working title for it is "Show Me."
Yeah.
Right? You saw that?
I didn't. Yeah.
Okay. Right. And I know we got a little history with that, but
Yeah.
it's like you are the show. Where Kay is talking about, there's a word for thought in some culture. He didn't even name the culture, but he said
Eskimo culture, actually.
Outside.
Yes, outside.
That's Eskimo culture.
The Eskimo word, I believe he said, for outside, like to go outside, is thought. And he thought that was interesting because in the Western world, it's thought of as
inside.
As inside.
Yeah.
And so this idea that that's also something that's outside, it's something that's echoed throughout, you know, many different theologians and religions and schools of thought, of this idea of what is within is also without. And
yes,
you know, there is something that is both finite and infinite.
Yeah, unless you're doing it sideways.
It is. It's like
it's only true in distinction. There's not a division, but the distinction is real.
Right.
Psychic fact.
It's the wave in the ocean. You can identify the crest and the trough and the points of you know, where it delineates itself from the ocean, but it never stops being the ocean. It continues to move as the ocean through that, and which that goes back into this idea of flow and these spirals off of it. But I don't want to get too far away from what we were talking about with writing and like your idea of like getting bored and the repetition of something. And it's something like you have to, like Krishnamurti talks about, constantly reincarnate now, meaning like you have to constantly be looking for the thing that is attracting you and go with that, right? So like for people in the beginning, it might be tricking, but like for me, tricking is what opened me up to interesting conversation with disparate minds at gatherings. And that, you know, flowered into, you know, my curiosity about these things, which has now led to the types of discussions that you and I have been having recently. And also like some of the conversations I'm starting to have with other people and, you know, more grounded in these fields. And so that is my version of reincarnating now, because, you know, it's not the physical act of tricking that gives me everything, but tricking has something, I think, to offer many people as a gateway drug, you know, as a catalyst to possibly set them on a road of curiosity and purpose down the line, you know? So it's not so much that like you're gonna become a tricker and we're gonna spread tricking to everyone and the whole world's gonna trick and there's just going to be peace among worlds, you know, because we can go to a gathering and people from Israel and Palestine can get together and double quirk together, and it's cool. Like, that's something amazing, yes, but I think it's more than that. It's the beginning of what Krishnamurti is talking about, of this idea of the individual actually coming into its own. And so if you can sort of give people the beginning, the beginner's luck, almost, like, give them a taste of, you know, that free first hit from the drug dealer. Like, hey, here's what this is about. Then they might want to ask and be like, hey, where do I get some more of that? How can I attain that again? How can I get to that? And that's one of the things that I'm so fascinated with is, you know, can we explain this in a way that people might actually open up their curiosity about it? Because if they could open up their curiosity about some of these things and start to get into this flow, especially if we have like the kind of framework that we've outlined in, you know, even just this one discussion of, you know, how these things sort of might tie together as meaningful, and like how it might be exceptionally important that you spend time drawing those letters, like not drawing the picture, but like doing that calligraphy. You know, it's like that might be just as important as a surgeon doing open heart surgery. That's a strange thing to say, but it might be true in a sense.
Well, here's the thing. Okay. What the writing is doing. Okay, I look forward to doing it. And I look forward. I'm enjoying writing. You know, when Isaiah was making a beat on New Year's, and I was, you know, writing rap to it, I wrote it all down, and it was nice to, like, holy shit, I'm writing in this beautiful cursive, and I can read it, and it's fast, and it's so, you know, it's been a week. It's great, cool. Now, the problem is, it's a form of escapism. There's things that I need to be doing which are much, much more important. And guess what? If they're not more important, there's still these things, these thoughts that I have not examined. And there's inner conflict. And what's important is not understanding the practicality of reincarnate now, that or however you want to say it. You know, just see it. That's not what's important. What's important is that we realize that we are inadequate, that we are irresponsible, that we're able to see it and not turn a blind eye to it. Because there's shit that I like, explicit things that I need to be doing, that I need to be taking care of, that are not being taken care of. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's what I mean. Like it's not enough to give examples. It has to hurt. And if you're able to open yourself up to the fact of it and not let the truth of your shortcomings scar you psychologically, but you feel them, you feel the importance, and you feel what's at stake, then you're actually awakening intelligence. You'll be able to think clearly. You act clearly. You put down, you know, put down the pen for later. You deal with the shit that has to be dealt with, you know?
Yes. Okay. I see what you mean. And I guess maybe I was being too.
You're very supportive. You're a person who likes to help people. You are productive. You're not some dick, and you have things that you want to do, and you have a project which has claimed you.
yes, but I have, like you said, I have my shortcomings, but I acknowledge them. I accept them, and I try to work on them, however difficult that may be. And like I consider myself very honest about them. You know, if people ask me like where my worst points are.
Well, yeah,
and,
you've been candid in this conversation for sure. You know, the video
Yeah,
games or whatever, brushing your teeth.
yeah,
Whatever it is.
I mean, it's so it's honesty. It's this, like I said, this alignment of unity of the filter getting out of the way. It's not to say that there aren't things weighed and thoughts happening in that moment, but rather, instead of dwelling on the potential of one versus the other and their outcomes, I notice the potentials and I act. It's it's not always that way, you know, like but those times when it's not that way are the times where I've come to this realization of like, those were the points where there was something disparate and something that, like, this idea that there's this time delay between acting and the thing coming towards you and your delay to action. So I want to say Alan Watts used it. I know I've heard it from several different gurus. The various different people who have talked about this idea of, oh fuck, I lost it for just a second. I took my attention from it. It's you're fine. Sorry, there's some background noise, and see, that's what I let myself get pulled out of the now. So when you're
the now that pulled you out of the future, you got some background noise happening there and then. You were ahead of where your words were, you know?
Oh, completely. Well, but I was not the observer paying attention to the things. I was speaking as something that was speaking. You know, that there was no delay. There was a congruence of I. And so when I heard that thing, it was something that wasn't prepared for. And, you know, and that's what you're talking about, like the moments where, you know, like you have to think on things, but it's like that was actually perfect timing for an example, because it's like all of these people that are talking about these ideas, these philosophers that are talking about just doing and acting. I remember where I was going. The story of the monk in the monastery, and there's several monks, and there's a fire that breaks out, and I believe the story goes something like, one of the monks says like, "Oh, there's a fire. We should do something." And another monk says like, we should get some water. And in the time that those two had said that, the fire got put out by the third monk, who acted.
Right.
Who instead of thinking, what should I do, just did what needed to be done, because they were paying attention. They were receptive to it.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at it, you'd hope, especially since it's a monastery, that there's something to be not necessarily envied, but you know, it's good on the other two monks, because you know what, they probably learned something. You know, maybe that other monk was in their position, and that's the point. Is that
well, I'm sure he
there
wasn't.
has to be, yeah,
He didn't
there
know
has to
what
be
to do in
learning.
that moment, but he let that knowledge fill his content of consciousness, so that in that next moment when he was paying attention, it could come to be. He could be truly in that flow because he had the skill prepared for the challenge, whereas the other two, they couldn't attain flow because they didn't have the skill necessary for the challenge. They were grasping at the skill. They were still developing the skill.
Right. So if they get let's say it's let's give the monks really fucked up names like Eric and Bailey, okay? Those are the two monks. So let's say Eric is the one who said, oh shit, there's a fire, okay? And Bailey said, oh, we need to get some water. You know, Bailey may be quite satisfied with himself, and may not even consider that the third monk, Jasper, you know, actually got the water. You know, he may
Oh
be
yeah, well,
quite,
I'm sure the first two monks were like, "Oh yeah, well thank God that we were here to tell him what to do and to make those suggestions."
yeah, maybe, or they may not even.
Well,
It may just go completely over their head.
people are always trying to rationalize the things around them to fit into their content of consciousness and delineate what can be tied to them and what can't be.
That's why I'm constantly reserved in talking about things like this, because I've talked to fans of Jordan Peterson. I've talked to people who've studied Krishnamurti for 20 years or more, and there's no guarantee that people are going to get this. There's none.
You have to come to it with a willingness to listen and to see and to hear. Like it's
and people can give lip service to that, you know.
It's not a want or a desire. It's different than that. It's your tuning fork, allowing yourself to resonate at whatever that frequency is. You know, like when you hit a tuning fork, it makes different sounds based on where you hold it and how hard you hit it. You know, and it's like we are that tuning fork in a way. And if we're actually, like the tighter you hold on to a tuning fork, you know, the harder you grasp it, the less noise it makes, the less frequently it rings out across time and across space, you know. But if you can just ever so gently hold that and give it an intention smack on something and just let it be, they can get really loud. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like when Krishnamurti said something, I think I'm gonna say something different.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's in the same attempt. The silence can be deafening.
Maybe. I didn't make it through the series, by the way. I'm somewhere around number 9. I tried to redo everything when you told me you were jumping in.
Oh, dude! It's near the end where they start to say some things and talk about some things. I mean, they're talking about the exact same thing the whole time, and it's all pretty I mean, like, we've covered a lot of it, but the way that they do it is, I mean, like I said, they talk around it as much as they possibly can so that you could find the space within to see what isn't there.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's some point somewhere on the first half where Anderson, you know, you see it happening in the
See, you're
first couple
doing it too.
interviews.
I'm fucking you up.
Like, you know, he says, you know, see, there I go again, going into that academic mode where I say, if I've followed you correctly.
Oh, you're talking about Alan Anderson. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Did I say Anthony?
No. I said Anthony, correcting you, thinking that you meant Anthony Peake, but you were speaking of Alan Anderson, and I followed.
Oh no, I finished all of that one. Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed that one. That guy's probably my all-time favorite. He didn't introduce me to Krishnamurti, but he's huge on Krishnamurti. He actually lived in. I bet he studied under him.
Anthony, or the guy who hosts the podcast?
The guy who's interviewing him. So it's a team of two. One of the guys' name is David Whitehead, who's a martial artist up in Canada. The other guy's name is Michael Tessarian. That's his pen name. And he's...
both of them were very, very eloquent in their speech for the most part. He lost me. I wouldn't say lost me, but he made me take a step backwards to sort of look with more diligence on what he was saying about some of the things when it came to channeling. I get.
Oh, David Whitehead, yeah.
I get actually what I'm talking about with the, like, he phrased it in a decent way. I don't want to close the door to that, but I also don't want to give give credit to the charlatans, right? And so I definitely understand that, but I think that, like, to a degree, what he could be talking about with the channeling, people may or may not ascribe different things and, like, other labels to it, but it might be something like when I talk to you about me talking from somewhere else that is, it seems bigger. You know, it's like I'm saying the words, I'm fully aware as a cognitive Dylan James that I am speaking, you know, like, I'm not trying to say that, like, someone is possessing me or there's some otherworldly thing, but it's more like I'm letting the speech naturally come out as it will, as opposed to applying this rigid filter to create a content of consciousness that is congruent with my desired view of content of consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's a tricky one, because it essentially boils down to whether or not you're relating or not, and I think the peak, the best you can get as far as Krishnamurti goes, like the furthest it goes, is with his notebook, and it really is torture to read. It's absolutely torturous. When I first read it, I was having major toothaches, and it really fucked me up because throughout the whole book he's describing a toothache and this intense pain in his jaw, and it contributing to a process where he's, you know, the brain is literally trembling and talking about essentially that brain explosion, you know, which your friends, you said it was your friend's father who was a potential theologian, but not quite.
Yeah, he started to go down the road and then got to a point and was like, nah, fuck this.
But yeah, like he essentially talks about that. But when he starts to try to really nail it down, what it is that he's getting at, he's still extremely cautious about how he does it. And what he does is he ends up naming down 5 or 6 things, but he breaks it down. And this is my favorite. This is actually my Twitter handle too. It's understanding the structure of envy. And and when you see it for what it is, that's the common thread in all of the Anderson dialogues and pretty much all of Krishnamurti's work. That's what he's trying to point to. And I hate to reduce it to one thing because it's not the solution, but it's the closest thing to one. And it's in completely denying what is and privileging one particular possibility. Now, privileging one particular possibility, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it obfuscates what is, if it gets in the way and eclipses your ability to actually see, then you're in trouble because you don't even know what you're chasing after. And even if you did, you wouldn't be able to see clearly enough to get it. And that's the whole thing in a nutshell. And it's tough. That's a tough sell because the human brain isn't built that way. And our culture is certainly not built that way. We have 1,000 different things pulling at us every second today. You know, I can't wait to get rid of my cell phone. I can't wait. As soon as I get a martial arts school, I'm dropping it. I won't need it anymore. Be done with it. You know.
Good for you. I definitely agree. There's the distraction, the noise, as it's sometimes described, is I mean it's like the noise that was a literal noise earlier. It's something distracting from what's coming to be, and it's part of things, but it's the responsibility of the individual to have the strength of character to be able to tune that out. You know, like has nothing to do with the fact that my friend made a noise. It has the fact to do that I let it distract me. That's where the problem is I let it become something because I tied to it. And it's that act of trying to not tie to things, but simply to take them in and let them go. And, you know, like, because like the more you try and grasp the thing, the harder it is to pin down. It was interesting because that you use the words Krishnamurti tried to nail these things down.
Yep.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that exactly. Or if I did, I would say that nails places.
Say again? I think you cut out there, or I cut out.
I mean, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily something to nail down. Like there's nothing to nail down, and that's the point. Is like you can't nail the thing down. It's not a thing to be nailed. It's not a thing at all.
Right. So the understanding does take a place, and they start very, very early in the dialogues, the Anderson Krishnamurti dialogues. You know, talking about what is the place of knowledge in the transformation of man.
Yes, and like I said, I listened to those several times because it was a point of confusion.
And the answer is, and this is one of his most famous quotes, which again, quite like the nature quote, is misunderstood, but I think it's telling here. Until the false is seen as false, the truth is not. Until the false is seen as false, the truth is not. And there's literally nothing to understand about order. Order is complete, clean discernment. All that you can learn about is disorder and the movement of it. And in seeing the truth of your inadequacies, that's what transforms you and changes your capacities as a human being.
Yes.
Not by making distinctions and having just mere insight, but having a sort of joy in the inquiry of who you are, what the hell you are, and allowing that, to really feel that and allow that to move you.
Yes, and allowing the turbulence to take you.
Allowing the turbulence to take you. I think we need to go into these this hydrodynamics and then cut it off. I didn't realize how late it was. So why don't you tell me a little bit about how that got started, the hydrodynamic analogies, the one particular source?
It was Ian McGillicris, and he was talking about. So he's talking about. I'm almost positive it was his address at a college, and I forget which college, but it starts with this lady who's talking about, like, a friend of mine was telling me, like, oh, this guy would just you know which one I'm talking about?
I know the one. I've seen it. I don't remember the hydrodynamics at all.
I want to say it was in that talk, but anyways, so he's talking about various things, and I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was talking about his ideas of this right hemisphere, left hemisphere of the brain, and this known versus unknown, and how one side of the brain is aware of the things that it does not know, whereas the other side of the brain is completely sure of itself. And
right,
he's talking about how some things are like too complex for us to simply pin down in, like, literally the act of pinning something down changes the nature of it, which is congruent across so many things, including quantum physics and like the uncertainty principle. And
so we're talking about abstract phase space with that. That's what I mean. Pinned down.
Okay, yes. Okay, so the mere act of measuring a thing dictates certain parameters within which it has to operate, and doesn't allow it to move as it would. Right? The act of looking changes.
Correct. Sure.
Well, are you familiar with the slit experiment?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Double slit.
The double slit experiment. Yes. So with that, it's like there's part of the brain that is trying to pin things down, and so when it pins things down, it's measuring, and when it's using that measurement, that quantitative like abstraction that it can file away in the content of consciousness that will fit in with things. It's paying attention to that. But then if you're actually, like, you're caught up in the act of doing the filing and reading the file over and over again as it gets filed, as opposed to the other side, the other hemisphere of the brain that isn't, focused on those things that it just learned and being sure in that knowledge, and being able to, recite it and write it down. Instead, it's, to use some young terminology, it integrates it with the psyche, and, it takes it as it is and applies it to
the content of consciousness.
I would say it's not even integrated. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't integrate it. The brain, that side of the brain, the right brain, is integrated. It is integrated, and it's not separate from the thing. It's not even an object for it.
Right. Well, and that's
Only in the left hemisphere. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and that's what McGillicuddy is getting at, and that's why he references like the Eastern philosophies and things like that. It's because it's this idea that you, like the wave, you can't separate it from the ocean. You can make discernments, you can make separations, but it does not stop being what it is, which is one thing altogether. Like you can cut it up however you like, and that's fine, but it makes no difference to it.
Right. Yeah. There's a philosopher named Alfred North Whitehead, and he said there are no such thing as facts. There's only points of concern. That's what shows up as a whole irreducible fact, which in his time and definitely in our time, things get reduced down to atoms, to some sort of completely discernible, completely stripped bare reality, which is just complete homogeneous number systems. And that's just simply not what our reality is like when viewed with meaning and events in history which are not homogeneous. They're heterogeneous. You can't relate them in a clear, discernible way, and it's fascinating, and people aren't astonished by it enough. I think that's what my contention is. And
yes.
Unless
okay,
yeah.
So this goes back to your idea of the repetition of things, and to people getting in the habit of brushing their teeth and not paying attention to it, or just writing and not doing the thing fully and entirely. And like that seems to be like you're not leaning into the novelty and the curiosity and inquiry that's actually being sparked within you. Because if you truly were, you would feel nothing more than alive. Like if you were constantly, it's when you're doing things that are not in alignment with what your, to use the best word, your Tao is, your like your way, like your path through things.
Keep going. I like where you're going with this.
Well, I mean, it's like there's inherent knowledge if you're paying attention. And, if you're paying attention, then you'll start to do calligraphy, you'll allow the thing to grow into the next thing and not become, what's the word I'm looking for? Desensitized to it. Like when it comes to,
yes.
When it comes to looking at a sunset, you should look at the sunset, and if you're not, then you shouldn't be there. Like if you're on top of a mountain and you're not really taking in what's there and enjoying that for what it is, then you aren't paying attention to what's there. And like for you, what's there? You should be somewhere else, doing something else, focused on something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Man, Yeah. I do think that's one of the reasons why so many of us trickers are having a shit fit is because
Because you
it's
let
sort of like
it grow.
we watch the sun rise for the first time in a lot of different ways, you know. And it happens to everyone. Like the first time they see the trick, whatever it is, it's like, you know, whatever, because you know everyone's seen a backflip, you know, but you know, oh, they fan their legs. What is that? It's called flash kick. You know, whatever it might be. 540 kick. I've only seen tornado. You know, I don't even know there's more beyond tornado. Whatever it is.
Exactly. The pattern that's the sum of its parts before. The thing iterating upon itself. The meme that's propagating.
You know, I almost forgot about this, Dylan. With all the hydrodynamics, when you were talking about people breaking out of the paradigm, and then that they're not really all that astonished until their entry level paradigm is sort of broken by whoever it is, an Anise or a Seth. Okay, well, no, Avelu. Okay, no, it's Guthrie. Oh, no, okay, no, it's Shosei, whoever it is.
Mm-hmm.
I had a name for that for the last couple of years, which is a breach. They've completely left the water, like a fucking whale.
You're talking about each of those people you just described in their own time. They were the breach. Yeah,
they
100%, and that goes.
They breached.
They breached what was possible within the collective knowledge across the domain, right? They were the creativity, which was the turbulence that broke apart from that laminar flow to become turbulent flow, right? And so that's what I'm talking about is, you know, it's like this, because like I said, you could conceptualize it like a circle, but that's not a good way of describing it. It's because I don't have the words at my disposal currently to properly describe higher dimension space, but it would be something like, you know, like I'm sure if I did enough research across higher dimensions and the way that it's described in that literature, I might have some words to bring that here. It's not necessary for understanding if you can just let the domain speak to you. You'll see like the extent of the domain as you learn more and more about it and how things are connected in interesting webs that move in ways that we can't explain. Like it's not an angle we have.
Mm-hmm.
They're arcs and signs, and like math tries to explain them, and we get all of these crazy functions and these interesting shapes and patterns, and you know, like it's because it's something that can't be nailed down as a simple like pattern. It's not just the sum of 1 + 1. It's the fact that 1 + 1 doesn't stay and tie itself to 1 + 1. It moves and it goes, okay, what's next? And it forgets 1 altogether. And it goes, 1 + 1 is 2. And then it forgets 1 and it goes, 1 + 2 is 3. And then it forgets 1. And then it goes, 2 + 3 is 5. And then it forgets. And so in each moment, it forgets the thing before it and moves on to the next thing.
Indeed. Oh boy. All right. We're gonna have to pick this up next time, man. It's getting late.
Okay, for sure.
Talking to you. I will.
I can for like 20 hours.
I'm pretty sure that you can watch this at any time or download it. If you have problems getting the link, message me.
Okay, definitely, yeah, because I'm definitely gonna want to have this, and I'm gonna probably listen to it once before I officially post it, but I definitely have some intention of posting it somewhere.
All right, for sure. All right, yeah, take a look at it. I'm not sure if I'll get a chance to check it out tomorrow, but yeah, just let me know what you do with it.
Yeah, no, I definitely enjoyed our back and forth, and I think I opened some good doors for conversation with some different people
Cool.
with my post earlier, that I could maybe expand on some of these things in a way that is less where we went and more neuroscientific and explainable by the material. I don't think that it's necessarily entirely separate. I think that they tie together, but it seems that there's going to be something in explaining it in a way that scientists and atheists are going to accept it in the same way that a theologian or a religious spiritual person is going to come to it.
That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Yes, but it's not something that people haven't been trying before. And,
I know.
And
it's funny because the guy who hosted that podcast released something in the last couple days, which is talking about just that. Scientific naturalists are basically trying to do this. Probably will name a lot of the people that you're researching, but I can't send you that one yet because for some reason they haven't posted the MP3. But as soon as I can, I'll send you that.
That would be sick.
Because as far as living human beings go, not the David Whitehead guy, the guy who was talking about channeling, but the other guy who the host Dave said, I'm really just learning from these two. He kills it. I really have no idea why he does a podcast with this guy. Maybe he's just getting paid a lot or whatever. But yeah, he is on some other shit, man. It's on some other shit. So.
Well, awesome. I'll definitely look forward to that. Yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome
to see where these conversations continue, because the last one was good, but I think this one we got to some of the things that we were just hinting at in that first one. I think that was
partial to the first one for some reason. I don't know.
What?
Yeah, I don't know why. I'm partial to the first one. It was maybe I needed it a lot more.
I definitely did. I definitely did. I think I'm right now. I'm looking back with a bit more of a filter right now, and I'm just thinking that it seems to be more comprehensive, and we explored some areas that were pushing on our boundaries, which I think you might be feeling that the first talk was more beneficial because that was really at the absolute peak of my boundary at that point. Like I hadn't come to the knowledge of certain things that allowed me to piece the things together in this conversation. And so it was much more of a, I had to speak from beside myself rather than like in this conversation, I was able to let the filter get in the way from time to time without it disrupting. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think my filter was very present. I think it was very, very present. Not sure if I'm just in a weird state or whatever, but yeah, I'll give it a listen if I can. I don't know if I'll find the time tomorrow, but yeah, let me know what happens with it and let me know what you think of it, and I will listen to it again eventually.
Awesome, man. Well, definitely keep lines of communication open like we have been. It's enjoyable to have someone to bounce the occasional quote to.
Absolutely, man. Will do.
All right. Well, you enjoy your evening and get some sleep. I will talk to you later.
All right, for sure, man. Have a great night. Happy New Year. Forgot
Yeah.
about that. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
All right. Peace, man.